The emergency room doors burst open at 3:47 a.m. as Lee Jae-hyun sprinted through the Seattle General Hospital corridors, his $1,000 Italian shoes slipping on the polished floor. The Armani suit jacket hung abandoned on his shoulders, the silk tie yanked loose around his neck. Behind him trailed 3 assistants and a translator, all breathless from the race against time that had brought them here from Seoul. "Room 314, the receptionist called out, her voice cutting through the chaos of beeping machines and hurried footsteps. Inside the pediatric ward, Minjun's cries pierced the air like shards of broken glass, each wail more desperate than the last. The 8-month-old baby had been screaming for 3 hours straight, his tiny fists clenched, his face red and blotchy from the trauma that had stolen his parents just 12 hours earlier. Nurses rotated in and out of the room, each attempting different techniques, swaddling, rocking, singing. But nothing worked. Jae-hyun stood frozen at the foot of the hospital bassinet, watching his nephew's agony with the helplessness of a man who could buy anything except the one thing he needed most, his sister back. The CEO, who commanded boardrooms filled with hundreds of executives, now trembled at the sight of one inconsolable infant. "Mr. Lee," Dr. Patterson approached cautiously. "We've tried everything we know. Sometimes babies who've experienced trauma. I can't do this," Jae-hyun whispered in Korean, his voice cracking as tears betrayed every lesson about composure his father had drilled into him. The billion-dollar empire he controlled seemed meaningless in this sterile room where money couldn't buy miracles. "Sujina, what do I do now without you, my sister?" The baby's screams intensified, as if sensing the despair radiating from his uncle. Nurses exchanged worried glances. Dr. Patterson checked his watch. 3.5 hours of non-stop crying was approaching dangerous territory for an infant already weakened by the accident. Then she appeared. Nia Harrington moved through the doorway like a whisper, her navy blue scrubs pristine despite the chaos around her. Golden skin caught the harsh fluorescent light, making her seem to glow with an inner calm that the room desperately needed. Her long, straight black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her gentle almond eyes assessed the situation with the expertise of someone who had seen too much pain but refused to become hardened by it. Without saying a word, she approached the bassinet. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, each step calculated to minimize disruption. She reached for Minjun with hands that seemed to possess some ancient knowledge about healing, about comfort, about the secret language between broken hearts. The moment her fingers touched the baby's skin, something shifted in the room's energy. "Shh, little one," she whispered, her voice carrying a melody that seemed to come from somewhere beyond training or technique. She lifted Minjun against her chest, supporting his head with practiced precision, and began a gentle swaying motion that mimicked the rhythm of a heartbeat. Then she hummed. It wasn't a lullaby Jae-hyun recognized, not Korean, not quite American. The melody seemed to bridge worlds, cultures, languages. It spoke to something primal and universal, the need for safety, for love, for someone to promise that tomorrow would be different than today. Minjun's cries began to soften. His tiny fists unclenched. His breathing started to match the steady rise and fall of Nia's chest. Within 3 minutes, silence filled the room. Complete, miraculous, impossible silence. Jae-hyun stared at the woman holding his nephew, watching as she continued the gentle sway while the baby's eyes finally fluttered closed. Her gold crucifix necklace caught the light as she moved, and for a moment, he wondered if he was witnessing something divine. "Who are you?" he whispered in English, his accent thick with exhaustion and wonder. Nia looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her eyes held depths of understanding that seemed to see straight through his expensive suit to the terrified man underneath. She smiled without answering, because some questions could only be resolved by time, and some miracles spoke louder than words. But as she handed the now sleeping baby back to a stunned Dr. Patterson, Jae-hyun made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. He had found the one person who could do what he couldn't. If you've ever wondered whether love can bloom in the most impossible circumstances, stay with us through this story of healing, hope, and the family we choose when everything else falls apart. The morning after the miracle, Jae-hyun sat in the hospital's executive conference room across from Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, the head of pediatrics. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shadows across legal documents spread between them like battle plans. "Mr. Lee, I understand your concern for your nephew's well-being," Dr. Martinez said carefully, her fingers steepled. "But what you're proposing is highly unusual." Jae-hyun's assistant, James Park, leaned forward. "My client is prepared to make a substantial donation to the hospital's pediatric wing. We're talking about expanding facilities, new equipment, research grants. It's not about money." Dr. Martinez's interruption was gentle, but firm. "Nurse Harrington is our head of pediatrics. She has responsibilities to dozens of children, not just one. Then I'll hire her privately." Jae-hyun's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making problems disappear with the right combination of resources and determination. "Whatever her salary is, I'll triple it." "She's not for sale, Mr. Lee." The words came from the doorway, spoken in a voice that had haunted Jae-hyun's thoughts since the previous evening. Nia Harrington stood at the threshold, her scrubs replaced by dark jeans and a soft lavender sweater that made her golden skin seem to glow. Her hair fell in gentle waves around her shoulders, and Jae-hyun found himself staring longer than was appropriate. "Miss Harrington," he stood, offering a slight bow that came from years of ingrained Korean etiquette. "Thank you for coming." "I came to check on Minjun," she replied, her tone professional but not unkind. "Dr. Martinez said you wanted to speak with me." Jae-hyun gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. I have a proposition." Nia remained standing. "I'm listening." "My nephew needs specialized care. Yesterday proved that you have abilities that—" He paused, searching for words in his second language that could capture the magnitude of what he'd witnessed. "That go beyond medical training. I want to hire you as his private caregiver." "Mr. Lee," Nia's voice softened. "I understand you're grieving, losing your sister, suddenly being responsible for a baby. It's overwhelming. But Minjun doesn't need a private nurse. He needs stability, routine, and time to heal. Just like you do." The kindness in her words hit Jae-hyun harder than any boardroom rejection ever had. He wasn't used to people seeing through his armor to the vulnerability underneath. "I can provide stability," he said. "Money, security, the best of everything. Can you provide love?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Martinez shifted uncomfortably in her seat. James Park's pen stopped moving across his notepad. Jae-hyun met Nia's gaze directly. "I loved my sister more than anything in this world. She was the only family I had left after our parents died. Now Minjun is all I have of her. If that's not love, I don't know what is." Something flickered across Nia's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. She moved to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline where glass towers pierced the gray morning sky. "I lost someone too," she said quietly. "My younger brother, Marcus Jr. He was 10. Car accident, just like your sister. I was supposed to pick him up from school that day, but I had to work a double shift." Jae-hyun felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry. For 2 years, I blamed myself. Threw myself into work, trying to save every child I could. As if somehow, if I saved enough other people's siblings, it would bring back my own." She turned back to face him. "That's why I became a pediatric nurse. And that's why I understand what you're going through." "Then help me." Jae-hyun's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I have billions of dollars, but yesterday I couldn't calm one crying baby. I have a Harvard MBA and 30 years of business experience, but I don't know the first thing about raising a child. I'm failing him, and I haven't even started yet." Nia studied his face, seeing past the polished exterior to the raw fear underneath. This wasn't the calculated request of a powerful executive. This was the desperate plea of a man drowning in circumstances beyond his control. "I can't be his private nurse," she said finally. "But I can teach you." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Nia, what are you suggesting?" "I'll consult on Minjun's care plan, visit a few times a week, help Mr. Lee learn the basics, feeding schedules, sleep routines, developmental milestones, just until he's comfortable managing on his own." Jae-hyun felt relief flood through him like water after a drought. "Name your price." "There is no price." Nia shook her head. "This isn't about money, Mr. Lee. This is about making sure that baby gets the care he deserves, and making sure his uncle doesn't collapse under the weight of trying to be perfect." James Park looked up from his notes. "Sir, we should discuss liability insurance, contract terms." "No contracts," Nia interrupted. "This is temporary help between two people who understand loss. When Mr. Lee feels confident caring for Minjun on his own, I'll step back." Jae-hyun nodded, though something in his chest protested at the idea of her eventually leaving. "How soon can we start? How soon can you admit that you need help?" The question carried layers of meaning that extended far beyond childcare. Jae-hyun had been raised to project strength, to solve problems independently, to never show weakness. The Korean concept of nunchi, the ability to gauge situations and respond appropriately, had been drilled into him since childhood, along with the understanding that men, especially men in positions of power, did not ask for help. But as he looked at this woman who had appeared in his darkest moment like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to pray, Jae-hyun realized that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "I need help," he said simply. Nia smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and extended her hand. "Then let's help each other." As their palms touched, Jae-hyun felt something shift between them, an understanding that went beyond words or cultural boundaries. Neither of them could know that this simple handshake would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the courage required to build something beautiful from the wreckage of loss. But somewhere in the pediatric ward, Minjun slept peacefully for the first time since the accident, as if he sensed that his small world was about to become much larger and infinitely more complicated. 3 days later, Nia stood outside the glass towers of Lee Industries' Seattle headquarters, craning her neck to count floors that seemed to disappear into the low-hanging clouds. The building dominated the skyline like a monument to ambition, its modern architecture reflecting the gray Pacific Northwest sky in countless windows. She checked her watch, 6:30 p.m., exactly as Jae-hyun had requested. The lobby bustled with the controlled chaos of a global corporation, transitioning between time zones, executives hurrying past with phones pressed to their ears, speaking in rapid Korean, Japanese, and English. "Miss Harrington." A young woman in an impeccable black suit approached, her smile professional but warm. "I'm Sarah Kim, Mr. Lee's assistant. He's waiting for you on the 42nd floor." The elevator ride felt endless, each ascending floor marking the distance between Nia's world and Jae-hyun's. By the time the doors opened onto the executive floor, she felt as if she'd traveled to another planet entirely. The penthouse apartment that served as Jae-hyun's temporary Seattle residence was a study in minimalist luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, where ferries crossed dark water like illuminated toys. The furniture was sleek and modern, chosen more for aesthetics than comfort. Everything designed to impress rather than invite. "You came." Jae-hyun appeared from what she assumed was the kitchen, Minjun cradled against his shoulder. The baby was awake but calm, his large dark eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "I said I would." Nia set down her nursing bag and reached for Minjun, who immediately relaxed into her arms. "How has he been sleeping?" "Not well," Jae-hyun admitted, running a hand through his hair. The polished executive from their first meeting had been replaced by a man who looked as if he hadn't slept properly in days. His dress shirt was wrinkled, his sleeves rolled up, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "He wakes up every 2 hours crying, and nothing I do helps." Nia assessed the apartment, with the practiced eye of someone who understood the relationship between environment and infant development. "Where is he sleeping?" Jae-hyun led her to a spare bedroom that had been hastily converted into a nursery. The crib was expensive, but positioned in the wrong corner, too close to the street-facing windows, where the sounds of traffic created a constant urban symphony. The room was spotless but sterile, lacking the warmth and comfort a traumatized child needed. "We need to move the crib," she said immediately, "away from the windows, preferably against an interior wall where it's quieter. And we need to dim these lights. They're too harsh for bedtime routines." As they repositioned the furniture, Nia began sharing the techniques she'd learned through years of caring for children in crisis. She showed Jae-hyun how to swaddle Min-jun properly, how to hold him during feeding to minimize gas and discomfort, how to recognize the subtle cues that indicated tiredness versus hunger versus the need for stimulation. "Babies who've experienced trauma often struggle with feeling safe," she explained, demonstrating the gentle swaying motion that had calmed Min-jun in the hospital. "Everything about their world changed suddenly and violently. Our job is to create predictability and consistency." Jae-hyun watched intently, his business-trained mind cataloging every detail. But as the evening progressed, Nia noticed something that concerned her. His interactions with Min-jun were careful, almost formal, as if the baby were a valuable but fragile piece of equipment rather than his family. "Try talking to him," she suggested, as Jae-hyun prepared a bottle with mechanical precision. "About what?" "Anything. Tell him about your day, your sister, your plans for tomorrow. Babies need to hear voices, especially voices of people who love them." Jae-hyun hesitated, the bottle suspended halfway to Min-jun's lips. "I don't know how to talk to babies." "Talk to him like he's a person," Nia said gently, "because he is." For several moments, silence filled the apartment, except for the distant hum of traffic below. Then, almost inaudibly, Jae-hyun began to speak in Korean, his voice soft and uncertain. "He's telling Min-jun about his sister," Nia realized, recognizing the cadence of grief even in a language she didn't understand. She watched as Jae-hyun's formal posture gradually relaxed, his movements becoming more natural as he settled into the unfamiliar rhythm of caregiving. Min-jun, as if sensing the emotional shift, began to drink more eagerly. "That's it," Nia encouraged. "He can feel that you're really connecting with him now." By 9 p.m., they had successfully gotten Min-jun to sleep using a combination of techniques: the right room temperature, proper swaddling, a consistent routine, and most importantly, Jae-hyun's growing confidence as a caregiver. As they tiptoed out of the nursery, Jae-hyun seemed almost amazed by their success. "How did you know all of this would work?" "Experience," Nia replied, settling onto the modern sofa that was as uncomfortable as it looked. "An instinct. Sometimes you have to trust that love will guide you to the right answers." Jae-hyun poured 2 cups of tea, chamomile, she noticed, the same blend the hospital used for particularly difficult nights. "May I ask you something personal?" Nia nodded, cradling the warm cup between her palms. "Why are you really helping me? And don't say it's just about Min-jun. I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. There's something else." The directness of the question caught Nia off guard. She'd become accustomed to men who approached relationships obliquely, who used charm and manipulation rather than honest curiosity. Jae-hyun's cultural background seemed to value straightforward communication, even when discussing difficult topics. "You remind me of someone," she said finally. "My father, actually. He was military, Army colonel. Very disciplined, very controlled, very focused on doing the right thing even when he had no idea what the right thing was. What happened to him? He died when I was 25. Heart attack. But before that, he spent years trying to raise my brother and me after our mother left. He was this incredibly capable man in his professional life, but put him in a room with 2 kids who needed emotional support, and he was completely lost." Jae-hyun leaned forward slightly. "Did he learn?" "Eventually. It took time, patience, and a lot of mistakes. But he learned that being strong didn't mean being perfect. It meant being present, even when you didn't have all the answers. And your brother? Nia's expression tightened. Marcus Jr. loved our father fiercely, even though Dad could never quite figure out how to show affection the way kids need it. When my brother died, I think part of my father died too. He blamed himself for not being enough. But it wasn't his fault. No, Nia agreed. Just like the accident that killed your sister wasn't your fault. The words hung between them like a bridge across an emotional chasm. Jae-hyun set down his teacup with hands that weren't quite steady. How did you know I blame myself? Because that's what we do when we love someone, Nia said softly. We replay every conversation, every decision, every moment we could have done something differently. We carry guilt that isn't ours to carry, because the alternative, accepting that some things are simply beyond our control, is too frightening to face. Jae-hyun was quiet for a long time, staring out at the Seattle skyline where lights twinkled like earthbound stars. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Sujin called me the night before the accident. She wanted me to visit, to meet Min-jun properly. We argued about her staying in America, about raising him here instead of Korea. I told her she was being selfish, putting her personal happiness ahead of family honor. Nia waited, sensing there was more. The last thing I said to my sister was that she was disappointing our parents' memory. She hung up, crying. He turned to face Nia, his eyes bright with unshed tears. If I had supported her decision, encouraged her to stay, maybe they wouldn't have been driving to the airport. Maybe she'd still be alive. Or maybe they would have had the accident on a different day for a different reason, Nia replied. You can't rewrite the past, Jae-hyun. You can only decide what kind of future you want to build from here. The sound of his given name on her lips seemed to surprise them both. Up until that moment, their interactions had maintained a careful formality, the professional distance between a consultant and a client. But something had shifted in the sharing of painful truths, creating an intimacy that went beyond their official roles. What kind of future do you think I should build? He asked. Nia studied his face, seeing past the polished exterior to the vulnerable man underneath. One where Min-jun grows up knowing he's loved unconditionally, where he's allowed to be both Korean and American, to honor his heritage while creating his own identity, where he has a father figure who shows him that strength comes from connection, not isolation. And what about his father figure's personal life? There was something in Jae-hyun's tone that made her heart skip. What kind of future should he build there? Before Nia could answer, Min-jun's cries echoed through the apartment, breaking the spell of their conversation. As they both rose to respond, their hands brushed briefly, and Nia felt an electric current of awareness that had nothing to do with childcare and everything to do with the dangerous territory they were beginning to navigate. I should go, she said, though every instinct told her to stay. Will you come back tomorrow? The question carried layers of meaning that extended far beyond professional consultation. Nia knew she was standing at a crossroads, with a decision that could change her carefully ordered life in ways she wasn't sure she was prepared for. But as Min-jun's cries continued, and she saw the mixture of hope and fear in Jae-hyun's eyes, she realized that some decisions make themselves. Same time tomorrow, she agreed, and wondered why it felt less like a professional commitment and more like a promise that might bind her heart to something beautiful and impossible. The Seattle rain drummed against the windows of Jae-hyun's apartment as Nia arrived for her 5th consecutive evening visit. What had started as professional consultation was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated, a routine that felt suspiciously like domesticity. You're soaked, Jae-hyun observed as she shook droplets from her coat. I should have sent a car. I like walking in the rain, Nia replied, though she accepted the towel he offered. It helps me think. About what? She glanced toward the nursery, where Min-jun's contented babbling provided a soundtrack of normalcy, about how much this little boy has changed in just 5 days. It was true. The traumatized infant who had screamed inconsolably was transforming into a curious, engaging baby who smiled when he recognized their voices and had started sleeping through the night. More remarkably, Jae-hyun was transforming too. From a rigid executive terrified of making mistakes to a man learning to trust his instincts as a caregiver. "He laughed today," Jae-hyun said, unable to hide his pride. "Actually laughed when I was making faces at him during his afternoon bottle." Nia felt her heart warm at the wonder in his voice. Babies laugh when they feel safe and loved. "That's all you're doing." "It's our doing," he corrected, and the casual use of "our" made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. They had developed an evening routine that worked like choreography. Nia would arrive as Jae-hyun finished his business calls. They would prepare Min-jun's dinner together, then take turns reading to him from picture books in both English and Korean. The bilingual bedtime stories had become Nia's favorite part of the day, watching Jae-hyun's face soften as he translated Korean lullabies his sister had once sung. Tonight, however, something was different. Jae-hyun seemed distracted, checking his phone more frequently than usual, and glancing toward the door as if expecting unwelcome visitors. "Is everything all right?" Nia asked as they settled into the living room after successfully putting Min-jun to bed. Jae-hyun poured their usual chamomile tea, but his movements were tense. "My mother is flying in from Seoul tomorrow." Nia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Seattle weather. "She's coming to meet Min-jun?" "Among other things." He handed her the teacup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "She's been displeased with my decision to remain in Seattle indefinitely. The board of directors is pressuring me to return to Korea, and she's coming to resolve what she views as a temporary lapse in judgment." Meaning she expects me to bring Min-jun to Seoul, where he can be raised by qualified Korean nannies in an environment she considers appropriate for a Lee family heir. Nia set down her cup with carefully controlled movements. "And what do you want?" "I want what's best for Min-jun," Jae-hyun replied. But there was something in his tone that suggested the answer was more complicated than that simple statement. "That's not what I asked." The directness of her challenge seemed to surprise him. In his world of corporate negotiations and diplomatic conversations, people rarely asked such straightforward questions about personal desires. "I want him to grow up knowing his parents were good people who loved him," Jae-hyun said slowly. "I want him to understand both sides of his heritage without being forced to choose between them. I want him to laugh every day and feel safe enough to explore the world around him. And I want," he paused, looking directly at her, "to be the kind of father figure who deserves that trust." Nia felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You're already becoming that person." "Am I? Because sometimes I look at him and see my sister's eyes, and I remember that I failed her. What if I fail him too?" Before she could respond, Jae-hyun's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. "I have to take this," he apologized. "It's the Seoul office." Nia listened to one side of a conversation conducted in rapid Korean, noting the increasing tension in Jae-hyun's voice and posture. Even without understanding the words, she could sense the pressure being applied from thousands of miles away. When he ended the call, his face had taken on the controlled mask she recognized from their first meeting. The executive armor he wore when dealing with problems that couldn't be solved through emotion or vulnerability. "The board is threatening a no-confidence vote if I don't return within 2 weeks," he said flatly. "Apparently, my extended absence is being viewed as abandonment of my responsibilities to shareholders and employees." 2 weeks, Nia repeated. "That's not very long." "No, it's not. What will you tell them?" Jae-hyun was quiet for so long that Nia wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of a decision that seemed to have been building since the moment they met. "I'm going to tell them that some responsibilities are more important than quarterly profits, that Min-jun needs stability and consistency, not another upheaval in his young life, and that I'm not ready to return to a world where boardroom politics matter more than bedtime stories." Nia felt her heart skip, but forced herself to voice the question that had been haunting her thoughts. "What about after Min-jun is older? What about when he's settled and secure? Will you go back then? Are you asking about my long-term business plans, or are you asking whether I'll leave?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Nia realized that somewhere in their daily routines of childcare and conversation, she had begun to imagine a future that included both of them. The thought terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. "I'm asking whether this is temporary help for a specific crisis, or whether you're building something permanent here." Jae-hyun set down his teacup and moved closer to her on the sofa, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes and smell the subtle cologne that had become achingly familiar. "What if I said I was hoping to build something permanent?" His voice was soft, careful. "What if I said that these past 5 days have felt more like home than the previous 34 years of my life?" Nia's pulse quickened. "I'd say that's a dangerous thing to hope for." "Why dangerous?" "Because I'm a pediatric nurse from a middle-class family, and you're a Korean billionaire with responsibilities to thousands of employees, and a mother who's flying here specifically to end whatever this is between us." "This?" He leaned slightly closer. "What exactly is this, Nia?" Her name on his lips sent warmth coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to be honest about the impossible situation they were creating. "This is two people who care about the same child finding comfort in each other during a difficult time," she said carefully. "This is trauma bonding and shared purpose and the kind of intense connection that feels significant, but might not survive real-world pressure. And what if it's more than that?" Before she could answer, the soft sound of Min-jun fussing drifted from the nursery. They both rose automatically, their synchronization after just 5 days together, a testament to how naturally they had fallen into shared caregiving. But as they reached the nursery doorway, Min-jun had already settled back to sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of secure slumber. "He's dreaming," Nia whispered, noting the slight smile playing across the baby's face. "About what, do you think?" "About feeling safe," she replied. "About being loved by people who will never leave him." Standing there in the dim light filtering through the nursery blinds, watching the child who had brought them together, Nia felt the full weight of what they were building and how much it could cost them both. "Your mother arrives tomorrow," she said softly. "Yes. This conversation we're having, we should probably finish it before she gets here." Jae-hyun turned to face her, his expression serious in the semi-darkness. "What if I don't want to finish it? What if I want to see what happens when two people stop being careful and start being honest about what they want?" Nia felt herself balanced on the edge of a precipice, knowing that her next words would either pull them back to safe ground or send them both tumbling into territory from which there might be no return. "Then I'd say you should be very sure about what you're willing to sacrifice," she whispered. "Because some things, once started, can't be undone." As Min-jun stirred again in his crib, making the soft sounds of a baby who felt secure enough to dream, neither of them moved away from each other or closer together. They simply stood there, suspended in possibility, while the Seattle rain continued its steady rhythm against windows that reflected their silhouettes, like a preview of the family they were afraid to believe they might become. Madame Lee Suk-jin arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport like a force of nature disguised in elegant clothes. At 61, she carried herself with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Her black hair pulled into an immaculate chignon, her navy hanbok-inspired suit tailored to perfection. The pearl brooch on her lapel had belonged to her mother and grandmother before her, a symbol of continuity and tradition that traveled with her wherever family honor was at stake. Jae-hyun waited in the VIP lounge, Min-jun sleeping peacefully in his carrier beside him. The baby wore a traditional Korean hanbok outfit that Jae-hyun had ordered specifically for this meeting, hoping to demonstrate his commitment to preserving Min-jun's cultural heritage. "Jae-hyun-ah," Madame Lee approached with the measured steps of someone accustomed to commanding attention through presence rather than hurry. "Yama." Jae-hyun rose and bowed respectfully, the gesture automatic after decades of ingrained protocol. Madame Lee's gaze immediately went to the sleeping infant. For a moment, her controlled expression softened as she took in Min-jun's features. The unmistakable family resemblance, the delicate beauty that reminded her so painfully of her lost daughter. "He looks like Soo-jin when she was small," she said quietly in Korean, her voice carrying the weight of grief she had been too proud to show in public. "He has her smile," Jae-hyun agreed, "and her stubborn streak." Despite herself, Madame Lee's lips twitched slightly. "Then he is truly a Lee." The drive to Jae-hyun's apartment was conducted in careful Korean, with Madame Lee inquiring about Min-jun's development, his health, his daily routines. Jae-hyun found himself describing Nia's techniques and insights without mentioning her name, unconsciously editing their conversations to focus solely on childcare rather than the deeper connection that was developing between them. "You have learned much about infant care very quickly," his mother observed. "The nannies I interviewed in Seoul were impressed by your detailed questions about feeding schedules and developmental milestones." "Nannies?" Jae-hyun felt his chest tighten. "Of course. I have selected 3 candidates with excellent credentials. Korean women with experience caring for Chaebol family children. They understand the importance of proper cultural education and family protocol." As they entered the apartment building, Jae-hyun realized that his mother hadn't come to evaluate his parenting. She had come to implement a predetermined plan that would relocate Min-jun to Seoul under professional Korean care. The apartment felt different with Madame Lee's presence filling it. She moved through the spaces with the assessing eye of someone cataloging deficiencies, noting the sterile modernity that lacked family photographs, cultural artifacts, or any indication of Korean identity. "This is not a proper environment for raising a Lee heir," she announced after her inspection. "Too Western, too isolated from family and cultural influences." "Min-jun is half American," Jae-hyun reminded her carefully. "His father's family." "His father's family is gone," Madame Lee interrupted with characteristic bluntness. "We are his family now. Our responsibility is to ensure he understands his heritage, his obligations, his place in the family structure." "And what place is that exactly?" "The same place you occupied at his age. Heir to the Lee family legacy, future leader of Lee Industries, guardian of traditions that have sustained our family for 4 generations." Jae-hyun felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. The expectation that had shaped every decision of his life, every relationship, every moment of spontaneity sacrificed to the greater good of family honor and business success. "What if he doesn't want that life?" he asked quietly. "Want?" Madame Lee's tone suggested the question was irrelevant. "This is not about wanting, Jae-hyuna. This is about duty, responsibility, family obligation. The same principles that guided your father, and his father before him." At that moment, Min-jun began to wake up, his small sounds escalating toward the crying that still struck panic in Jae-hyun's heart. Without thinking, he began the routine that had become second nature. Checking the diaper, testing the bottle temperature, settling into the gentle swaying motion that Nia had taught him. But Min-jun continued to fuss, his cries growing more distressed. Madame Lee watched her son's increasingly frantic efforts with expressions that shifted from criticism to concern. "You said he was sleeping well." "He usually does," Jae-hyun replied, trying the humming technique that sometimes worked. "I don't understand what's wrong." Min-jun's cries intensified, his face reddening with distress that seemed disproportionate to any physical discomfort. Jae-hyun tried everything, different positions, singing, walking, feeding, but nothing worked. "Perhaps he senses the disruption in his routine," Madame Lee suggested. "Children need consistency." After 30 minutes of unsuccessful attempts to calm Min-jun, Jae-hyun made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of his mother's visit. He called Nia. "I know it's early," he said when she answered, "but Min-jun is inconsolable and I don't know what else to do." "I'll be right there," she replied without hesitation. 15 minutes later, Nia arrived still wearing her hospital scrubs from the night shift, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her nursing bag slung over her shoulder. She moved through the apartment with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to pediatric crises. Madame Lee observed her approach with the sharp attention of a predator, assessing a potential threat. "You must be Mrs. Lee," Nia said in perfectly respectful English, offering a slight bow that acknowledged cultural protocol while maintaining her own dignity. "I'm Nia Harrington, Minjun's pediatric consultant." "Consultant," Madame Lee repeated the word as if testing its validity. Meanwhile, Nia had reached for Minjun, her hands finding their familiar rhythm of comfort and security. Within moments, the baby's cries began to subside, his breathing settling into the steady pattern that indicated relief. "There we go," Nia murmured softly, beginning the gentle sway that had become her signature technique. "You just needed someone familiar, didn't you, sweet boy?" Madame Lee watched this transformation with expressions that cycled through surprise, suspicion, and reluctant admiration. The young woman had accomplished in seconds what her son had been unable to achieve in half an hour. "How did you do that?" Madame Lee asked in careful English. "Babies who've experienced trauma sometimes regress when their environment changes," Nia explained, continuing the soothing motion. "New voices, different energy, disrupted routines. It can trigger anxiety even in infants. He just needed reassurance that his safe people were still here." "His safe people," Madame Lee repeated. "And you consider yourself one of his safe people?" Nia glanced at Jae-hyun, who was watching the interaction between the two most important women in his life with obvious tension. "I consider myself someone who cares about his well-being," she replied diplomatically. "Both his and his uncle's." "I see." Madame Lee's tone carried layers of meaning that made Jae-hyun's chest tighten with apprehension. As Nia successfully transitioned Minjun back to peaceful alertness, engaging him with the soft singing and gentle play that had become part of their daily routine, Madame Lee continued her assessment. "Miss Harrington," she said finally, "might I speak with you privately?" Nia looked to Jae-hyun, who nodded reluctantly. They moved to the kitchen area, while he remained in the living room with Minjun, close enough to overhear, but far enough to provide the illusion of privacy. "You have been very helpful to my son during this difficult time," Madame Lee began, in the tone of someone building toward a larger point. "It's been my pleasure," Nia replied. "Minjun is a remarkable child." "Indeed, and his future is very important to our family." Madame Lee paused, studying Nia's face with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to reading people's weaknesses and strengths. "I understand you have been providing care consultation for several weeks." "Yes, ma'am." "And I imagine you have grown attached to the child." Nia felt the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. Any caregiver becomes invested in a child's well-being. "Of course." Madame Lee opened her purse and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Which is why I hope you will understand that what I am about to propose comes from a place of genuine respect for your contributions." She placed a bank draft on the kitchen counter between them. The amount was written in figures that made Nia's breath catch. Enough money to pay off her student loans, buy a house, secure her financial future for years to come. "This is compensation for your time and expertise," Madame Lee explained smoothly, "along with a bonus that reflects the Lee family's gratitude for your exceptional care during a challenging period." Nia stared at the check, understanding immediately that it was not a payment. It was a purchase order. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I am asking you to complete your consultation with the knowledge that Minjun will be well cared for by qualified Korean nannies who understand his cultural needs. I am asking you to step back gradually, allowing my son to focus on his responsibilities to the family business and the child's long-term interests. You're asking me to disappear. I am asking you to recognize that sometimes loving someone means wanting what is best for them, even when it requires personal sacrifice." The words hit Nia with the force of careful cruelty, designed to appear noble while accomplishing exactly what Madame Lee intended. She looked across the apartment to where Jae-hyun was playing with Minjun, both of them laughing at some private joke, and felt her heart break a little at the sight of what she was being asked to give up. "And if I don't agree?" Madame Lee's expression didn't change, but her voice carried an edge of steel beneath the silk. "Then I will be forced to question whether your attachment to this family is based on genuine concern for the child's welfare, or other motivations that might not serve his best interests." The implication was clear. Refuse the money, and face public suggestions that she was using Minjun's tragedy to pursue a relationship with his wealthy uncle. Nia folded the check in half without looking at the amount again. "Mrs. Lee, I want you to know that I have never, not once, considered my relationship with your son as anything other than professional consultation focused on Minjun's needs." "I believe you," Madame Lee replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But I also want you to know," Nia continued, her voice growing stronger, "that the amount on this check tells me exactly how threatened you are by the possibility that your son might choose his own path instead of the one you've planned for him." Madame Lee's controlled expression flickered for just a moment, revealing the sharp intelligence and fierce protectiveness that had built and maintained a family empire. "Miss Harrington," she said softly, "I have spent 30 years watching my son sacrifice his personal desires for family duty. I have seen him give up relationships, friendships, and opportunities because he understood his obligations to something larger than himself. Do you really believe he will abandon all of that for a temporary connection formed during a crisis?" The question hung in the air like a poisoned arrow, designed to wound through truth rather than lies. Before Nia could respond, Minjun's laughter filled the apartment as Jae-hyun successfully executed some bit of silly physical comedy. The sound was pure joy, the kind of happiness that transcends cultural boundaries and family politics. "He deserves that," Nia said quietly, nodding toward the sound. "He deserves to laugh every day and feel safe and know that the people who love him will fight for his happiness above everything else." "And you believe my son is prepared to do that?" Nia looked directly into Madame Lee's eyes, seeing the fierce love and protective instincts that motivated even her most manipulative actions. "I believe your son is learning to do that," she replied. "The question is whether you'll give him the chance to prove it." As Minjun's delighted giggles continued to echo through the apartment, both women stood in the kitchen, holding weapons designed to protect the people they loved most. Money and truth, tradition and change, the certainty of the past and the terrifying possibility of an uncertain but authentic future. The choice, they both understood, would ultimately belong to Jae-hyun. But first, he would have to realize he had the right to make it. The confrontation Jae-hyun had been dreading finally arrived over breakfast the next morning. Madame Lee sat across from him at the dining table, her posture perfect, her expression carefully neutral as she sipped green tea from the expensive china set he'd had shipped from Seoul. "The nurse was here very early yesterday," she observed in Korean, the language they used for family discussions that required complete understanding. "Nia responds whenever Minjun needs her," Jae-hyun replied, deliberately using her first name. "She's been invaluable in helping him adjust." "I'm sure she has been." Madame Lee set down her teacup with the precise control that characterized all her movements. "Tell me about your relationship with Miss Harrington." "She's a pediatric nurse who has been consulting on Minjun's care." "That's not what I asked." Jae-hyun felt the familiar weight of his mother's expectations settling around him like armor that had become too heavy to wear. "What exactly do you want to know, Iyama?" "I want to know if you are making decisions about Minjun's future based on the child's best interests, or based on your feelings for a woman who represents everything our family has never been." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to highlight the impossible gulf between his world and Nia's. "Minjun is half American. His father's heritage died with his parents," Madame Lee interrupted. "What remains is his connection to the Lee family, to Korean culture, to a legacy that has sustained 4 generations of our ancestors. And what if that legacy isn't what's best for him?" The question seemed to surprise Madame Lee, as if she had never considered that family tradition could be anything but beneficial. "You sound like your sister," she said quietly, and for the first time since her arrival, her controlled expression cracked slightly. "Soojin said similar things before she moved to America. Maybe Soojin was right. Soojin is dead, Jae-hyuna. Her choices led her away from family, away from safety, and ultimately cost her life. Do you want to make the same mistakes?" The accusation hung in the air like poison, made more cruel by the grain of truth it contained. Soojin had chosen love over duty, personal happiness over family expectations, and the result had been tragedy. "That's not fair," Jae-hyun said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Life is not fair," Madame Lee replied. "Life is about making choices that protect the people we love, even when those choices require personal sacrifice. Your father understood this. I understood this. And until recently, I believed you understood it too." Min-jun chose that moment to wake up from his morning nap, his cheerful babbling providing a counterpoint to the heavy conversation. Jae-hyun rose to get him, grateful for the temporary reprieve. But as he lifted his nephew from the crib, Madame Lee's words echoed in his mind. Was he making decisions based on what was best for Min-jun, or based on his growing feelings for Nia? And if those two motivations were in conflict, which should take precedence? "The board meeting is scheduled for Friday," Madame Lee continued when he returned to the dining room with Min-jun. "They have agreed to delay the no-confidence vote until you can present your long-term plan for managing both your corporate responsibilities and guardianship duties." And what plan would satisfy them? Return to Seoul with Min-jun. Resume your role as CEO. Allow qualified Korean nannies to handle daily childcare while you focus on building the company that will be his inheritance. Jae-hyun looked down at Min-jun, who was reaching for a shaft of sunlight streaming through the windows, his small face bright with curiosity about the world around him. "What if I don't want that life for him?" "Then you are being selfish," Madame Lee replied bluntly. "You are prioritizing your temporary desires over his permanent security." Before Jae-hyun could respond, his phone rang. Nia's name appeared on the screen, and he felt his heart skip in a way that proved his mother's point about the dangerous territory his emotions had entered. "I should take this," he said. "By all means." Nia's voice was professional, but he could hear underlying concern. "Hi, I'm calling to check on Min-jun after yesterday's episode. How did he sleep?" "Better, thank you. Your techniques worked as always." "Good. And how are you doing?" The question carried personal warmth that had nothing to do with pediatric consultation, and Jae-hyun was acutely aware of his mother listening to every nuance of his response. "I'm managing," he replied carefully. "Is your mother still there?" "Yes." "I see. Well, I don't want to intrude on family time. Just let me know if you need anything." Jae-hyun felt the conversation slipping away from him, the professional distance returning to Nia's voice as she sensed the complexity of his situation. "Actually," he said impulsively, "would you be available for lunch today? There are some things about Min-jun's development that I'd like to discuss." Madame Lee's eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing. "Of course," Nia replied, though there was hesitation in her voice. "The usual place?" "Yes." 1 o'clock? "I'll see you then." After he hung up, Madame Lee regarded him with the expression of someone who had just had her suspicions confirmed. "You are going to discuss the child's development," she said, in a tone that suggested she found the explanation inadequate. "Among other things." "What other things?" Jae-hyun met his mother's gaze directly, feeling something shift inside him. Not rebellion exactly, but a growing awareness of his own agency in a situation where he had been allowing others to make choices for him. "I'm going to discuss what kind of life I want to build for Min-jun, and what kind of person I want to be as his guardian. I'm going to ask for advice from someone who understands child development and trauma recovery. And yes, Yama, I'm going to spend time with a woman whose company I enjoy, and whose presence makes me feel like a better version of myself. And then I'm going to make my own decisions about my future." Madame Lee was quiet for a long moment, studying her son's face with the attention of someone reassessing a familiar landscape that had suddenly revealed new territory. "Your sister said similar things," she finally said, "the last time we spoke." The weight of that comparison settled between them like a challenge. Jae-hyun could choose the safe path of family duty and traditional expectations, or he could choose the uncertain path of personal authenticity and risk the consequences. As Min-jun reached for his face, tiny fingers grasping with the absolute trust of a child who believed the adults in his world would protect him from harm, Jae-hyun realized that the choice wasn't really between duty and desire. It was between fear and courage. And for the first time in his adult life, he was beginning to understand which one he wanted to choose. The Pike Place market bustled with its usual midday energy as Nia waited for Jae-hyun at their established meeting spot, a small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay, where they had taken to discussing Minjun's progress over coffee, and the kind of conversation that had started professional but had become something deeper. She arrived early, needing the time to process the emotional whiplash of the past 24 hours. Madame Lee's offer had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. The vast gulf between her world and Jae-hyun's, and the family forces that would always view her as an outsider to be managed, rather than a person to be accepted. "You look like someone stole your favorite stethoscope." A familiar voice interrupted her brooding. Nia looked up to see Marcus Thompson approaching their table, his tall frame imposing even in the casual clothes he wore during his rare days off. His jade green scrubs had been replaced by jeans and a navy sweater that brought out his warm brown eyes, and his usually serious expression carried a hint of the boyish smile that had once made half the nursing staff develop hopeless crushes. "Marcus." She stood to hug him, grateful for the comfort of his familiar presence. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are, I suspect. Meeting someone for lunch." He settled into the chair across from her, his movements casual but his eyes alert. "Though I'm guessing your someone is more complicated than mine." Before she could ask what he meant, Marcus nodded toward the entrance where Jae-hyun was making his way through the crowded cafe. Even in the casual environment of the market, he commanded attention. The expensive cut of his clothes, the confident way he moved, the subtle but unmistakable aura of power and wealth that set him apart from everyone else in the room. "That would be the billionaire CEO who's been monopolizing your free time for the past 2 weeks," Marcus observed. "It's not like that," Nia protested. But even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. "Isn't it?" Jae-hyun reached their table, his expression brightening when he saw Nia before becoming more cautious as he took in Marcus's presence. "Mr. Lee." Marcus stood and extended his hand with the professional courtesy that masked years of protective instincts where Nia was concerned. "Marcus Thompson. I work with Nia in pediatrics." "Please call me Jae-hyun," he replied, accepting the handshake while studying Marcus's face with the attention of someone assessing potential competition. "Nia has mentioned you. You've been very supportive during Minjun's treatment." "Nia's the best pediatric nurse I've ever worked with," Marcus replied, his tone carrying undertones that made Jae-hyun's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "She has a gift for seeing what children need, even when they can't express it themselves." "Yes," Jae-hyun agreed carefully. "She's been invaluable." The tension between the two men was palpable, like electrical current running beneath the surface of polite conversation. Nia felt caught between them, aware that whatever was happening here went beyond professional courtesy or casual introductions. "Actually," Marcus continued, "I was hoping to speak with Nia privately before you two started your meeting. There's something we need to discuss." Jae-hyun looked to Nia, who nodded reluctantly. "Of course. I'll get us a table." As Jae-hyun moved away, Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Nia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you falling in love with him?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Marcus, because if you are, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for a conversation he'd been avoiding for too long. "I'm in love with you. I have been since the day we met during our residency rotations. I've watched you pour your heart into saving other people's children, while keeping your own heart locked away from everyone who might want to care for it." Nia felt the world shift around her, as if the busy cafe had suddenly gone silent, and the only sound was her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. "Marcus, Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know you see me as a friend, as someone safe and familiar. I know you've never looked at me the way you look at him. But I also know that he's going to break your heart. You don't know that, don't I? Marcus leaned back, his expression sad but determined. He's a Korean chaebol heir, Nia. Do you understand what that means? His family controls billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. His mother didn't fly here from Seoul for a social visit. She came to end whatever this is between you two before it threatens the family's plans for him. Nia felt the truth of his words settle in her chest like cold stone. How do you know about his mother? Because I know you, and I know that look you get when someone's trying to convince you that you're not good enough for something you want. Marcus reached across the table and took her hands, his touch warm and steady and utterly familiar. What did she offer you? Money? A job somewhere else? A chance to do the right thing by stepping aside? The accuracy of his guess made Nia's breath catch. She's trying to protect her family. She's trying to control her son, and she's using you to do it. Marcus's voice carried the frustrated love of someone who had watched her sacrifice her own happiness too many times. And you're going to let her, aren't you? You're going to convince yourself that loving him is selfish, that wanting something for yourself is somehow wrong. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Marcus interrupted with surprising intensity. You've spent your entire career taking care of everyone else while telling yourself that you don't deserve the same care in return. You lost your brother and decided that meant you had to save every other child in the world to somehow balance the scales. But Nia, you can't heal other people's trauma by refusing to heal your own. Tears she hadn't realized were forming began to spill down her cheeks. What if you're wrong? What if he does choose his family over me? What if I'm just a temporary distraction during a difficult time? Then you'll survive it, Marcus said simply. But at least you'll have tried for something real instead of settling for something safe. And what about us? What about our friendship? Marcus smiled, though the expression carried deep sadness. Our friendship means everything to me, but I can't keep pretending that I don't want more. And I can't keep watching you avoid love because you think you don't deserve it. Nia looked across the cafe to where Jae-hyun sat alone at a corner table, checking his phone, but occasionally glancing in their direction with expressions that revealed his anxiety about the private conversation taking place. He looks at you like you hung the moon, Marcus observed, following her gaze. I've never seen a man look at a woman the way he looks at you. But I've also never seen a woman so afraid of being looked at that way. I'm not afraid. You're terrified, Marcus corrected gently. And I understand why. But Nia, what if he's willing to fight for you? What if he's willing to give up everything his family expects of him to build something real with you and Minjun? Wouldn't you rather know for certain than spend the rest of your life wondering? Before she could answer, Jae-hyun appeared at their table, his expression careful but concerned. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but I just received a call from my mother. There's been a development with the board situation that we need to discuss. Nia wiped her tears quickly and stood, but Marcus caught her hand. Think about what I said, he urged, and remember that whatever happens, you deserve to be loved completely and unconditionally. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. As Marcus walked away, Nia felt as if she were standing at the center of an emotional storm with no clear path to safety. Behind her was the comfortable familiarity of friendship with a man who loved her but had never challenged her to grow beyond her self-imposed limitations. Ahead of her was the uncertain territory of a love that could transform her life or destroy it completely. What did he want to discuss? Jae-hyun asked as they settled at their table. Nia looked into his dark eyes, seeing concern and growing affection and the kind of vulnerability that only appeared when he let his executive armor slip away. He wanted to remind me that some choices can't be undone, she said quietly, and that sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one we don't make. As Jae-hyun reached across the table to take her hand, Nia realized that Marcus had been right about one thing. She was standing at a crossroads where safety and authenticity diverged completely, and the decision she made in the next few moments would determine not just her own future, but the futures of a man learning to put love before duty, and a child who deserved a family built on courage rather than compromise. The Seattle Space Needle gleamed against the overcast sky as Jae-hyun led Nia to their corner table, his hand warm and steady against her lower back. The restaurant's panoramic windows offered a view of the city spread below them like a map of possibilities. But the beauty of the scene felt overshadowed by the weight of whatever news had prompted this urgent meeting. "You said there was a development with the board situation," Nia said once they were seated, noting the tension in his shoulders despite his attempt to appear calm. Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment, staring out at Elliott Bay where ferries moved like toys across dark water. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the controlled precision of someone delivering difficult news. "The board has moved up their timeline. They're demanding I return to Seoul within 72 hours, or they'll initiate the no-confidence vote immediately." He turned to meet her gaze directly. "They've also made it clear that my continued relationship with what they term inappropriate American influences will factor into their decision about my fitness to lead the company." Nia felt her chest tighten. Inappropriate American influences. They mean you. The words hung between them like a barrier, making explicit what had been implicit since Madame Lee's arrival. Nia was not just an outsider to the Lee family. She was perceived as a threat to everything they had built over generations. "And what did you tell them?" Jae-hyun reached across the table and took her hands, his touch gentle, but his expression determined. "I told them that my first responsibility is to Min-jun's well-being, and that anyone who truly cared about the Lee family legacy would understand that a child's needs come before corporate politics." "That's not really an answer, isn't it?" He leaned forward slightly. "Nia, these past 2 weeks with you and Min-jun have taught me something I never understood before. Success isn't just about building wealth or maintaining family honor. It's about creating something meaningful with people you love, even when the rest of the world thinks you're making the wrong choice." Nia felt her heart skip, but forced herself to address the practical realities they faced. "What about the thousands of people who depend on Lee Industries for their jobs? What about your obligations to shareholders, to the Korean economy, to everything your family has built? What about my obligation to myself?" Jae-hyun's voice carried a conviction that surprised them both. "What about my obligation to show Min-jun that family is about more than blood and tradition, that love is worth fighting for, even when it's difficult?" Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood chill. "What is it?" Jae-hyun asked, noting her expression. "Marcus," she said quietly. "There's something I need to see on the news." And she pulled up the news app on her phone, and the headline made her stomach drop. "Korean Billionaire's Secret Romance. CEO Lee Jae-hyun spotted with Seattle nurse amid family crisis." Below the headline was a photograph taken through the restaurant's windows. Jae-hyun holding her hands across their table, both of them leaning toward each other with expressions of obvious intimacy and affection. "How did they—" Nia began. "Paparazzi," Jae-hyun said grimly, scanning the article. "My mother must have alerted them to my location. This is exactly the kind of public pressure she uses when private persuasion fails." Nia read the article with growing horror. The piece painted her as an opportunistic nurse who had inserted herself into a family tragedy to pursue a relationship with one of Korea's most eligible bachelors. It mentioned her middle-class background, her student loans, her convenient expertise in pediatric care. Every detail of their relationship was reframed to suggest calculation rather than genuine connection. "This is going to destroy my career," she whispered. "No one will hire a nurse who they think got involved with a patient's family for personal gain." "That's not what happened." "It doesn't matter what actually happened," Nia said, her voice rising with panic. "This is the story now. This is what people will believe." Jae-hyun's phone began ringing immediately. His assistant, his mother, board members, journalists. The carefully constructed privacy they had maintained around their growing relationship had been shattered in a single news cycle. "Don't answer," Nia urged as he reached for the phone. "I have to. The longer I stay silent, the more speculation there will be." He accepted the call from his assistant. "James, what's the situation?" Even from across the table, Nia could hear the urgent tone of the conversation conducted in rapid English and Korean. Jae-hyun's expression grew progressively more grim as he listened. "Yes, I understand," he finally said. "Schedule the emergency session for tomorrow morning. And James, issue a statement that my personal life is not subject to board approval, and anyone who suggests otherwise is welcome to find other employment." He hung up and immediately turned off his phone. "That sounded definitive," Nia observed. "The board is calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. If I don't appear and renounce any romantic involvement with you, they'll remove me as CEO and appoint an interim leader who will relocate Minjun to Seoul immediately. And if you do appear and renounce involvement with me, then I get to keep my job and raise Minjun according to their specifications, with Korean nannies, Korean tutors, and eventual enrollment in Korean schools that will prepare him to take over the company when he's old enough." Nia felt the walls closing in around them. "So your choices are lose everything, or lose me. Those aren't my only choices. What other choice is there?" Jae-hyun was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Seattle skyline, as if the answer were written in the arrangement of glass and steel towers reaching toward the gray sky. "There's the choice to stop letting other people determine what my life should look like," he said finally. "There's the choice to build something new instead of just maintaining something old." "What does that mean practically?" "It means I resign from Lee Industries. I liquidate my personal holdings and create an independent trust fund for Minjun's education and future. I start over here in Seattle, building something smaller but more authentic." Nia stared at him, unable to process the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "You're talking about walking away from billions of dollars, from your family legacy, from everything you've worked for your entire life. I'm talking about choosing love over fear," he corrected. "I'm talking about showing Minjun that courage matters more than comfort. And what if I can't handle the pressure? What if the public scrutiny and family disapproval and cultural conflicts become too much? What if I'm not strong enough for this kind of life?" Jae-hyun leaned across the table and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but his gaze intense. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "That's what people who love each other do. They support each other through difficult times." "Love," Nia repeated, the word hanging between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. "Yes, love," Jae-hyun confirmed. "I'm in love with you, Nia. I'm in love with your strength and your compassion, and the way you make Minjun laugh. I'm in love with the way you challenge me to be better than I thought I could be. And I'm willing to give up everything else to see if you might be willing to love me back." Tears began to flow down her cheeks as the full weight of his words settled in her heart. "I am in love with you," she whispered. "But I'm terrified of what that means." "It means we stop being careful and start being brave," he replied. "It means we trust that what we're building together is strong enough to withstand whatever pressure the world puts on it." As they sat in the rotating restaurant high above Seattle, surrounded by windows that offered a view of endless possibilities, Nia realized that Marcus had been right about one thing. The most dangerous choice was often the one you didn't make. But as Jae-hyun's phone began buzzing again with calls from Seoul and reporters and family members who would never understand the decision he was preparing to make, she also understood that choosing love over safety would require more courage than either of them had ever needed before. The question was whether that courage would be enough to overcome the forces already mobilizing to tear them apart. St. Mary's Hospital felt different as Nia walked through the familiar corridors the next morning, knowing that every colleague she passed had likely seen the news stories about her relationship with the Korean billionaire. Some offered supportive smiles, others averted their eyes, and a few watched her with the uncomfortable curiosity reserved for people who had suddenly become the subject of gossip. Dr. Martinez intercepted her before she could reach the pediatric ward. "My office, please." The walk down the hallway felt like a march toward execution, each step echoing in the sterile environment that had been her professional sanctuary for 5 years. Once inside Dr. Martinez's office, Nia braced herself for the conversation she'd been dreading since seeing her photograph splashed across news websites. "Sit down," Dr. Martinez said, her tone carefully neutral. "Dr. Martinez, I want you to know that everything in those articles is irrelevant," the older woman interrupted. "Your personal life is your personal life, and I'm not in the habit of managing my staff's romantic relationships." Nia felt a moment of relief before Dr. Martinez continued. "However, I do need to discuss the broader implications of this situation for the hospital and for your position here." The relief evaporated instantly. The hospital's legal department is concerned about potential liability issues related to your consultation work with Mr. Lee. There are questions about whether our insurance covers staff who provide private services to patients' families, and whether there might be conflicts of interest that we haven't properly documented. "I never provided medical services outside the hospital," Nia protested. "I simply helped with childcare techniques and developmental guidance." "I know that, and you know that, but our lawyers are nervous about how it might appear to regulators or in potential litigation. They're recommending that we temporarily suspend your consulting arrangements with outside parties while they review our policies." Nia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "What does that mean for my position here?" "It means you're still employed, still a valued member of our team, but you can't provide any services to the Lee family while this review is ongoing." "I'm sorry, Nia. I know this isn't what you want to hear." The irony was bitter. The attempt to protect herself professionally by keeping her relationship with Jae-hyun quiet had failed, and now she was being punished for the very discretion that was supposed to shield her from exactly this kind of scrutiny. "How long will the review take?" "Potentially weeks. Maybe longer if the media attention continues." Nia left Dr. Martinez's office feeling as if her carefully constructed life was crumbling around her. She couldn't help Jae-hyun with Min-jun, couldn't provide the professional justification that had allowed their relationship to develop, and couldn't escape the growing sense that forces beyond her control were systematically dismantling everything she cared about. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Room 204. Emergency." She found him in the supply closet they had converted into an impromptu break room during particularly stressful shifts, his expression grim as he closed the door behind her. "I heard about Martinez," he said without preamble. "I'm sorry. News travels fast. Hospital gossip always does." Marcus leaned against the supply shelves, his arms crossed. "But that's not why I asked you to meet me here." "Then what?" "I know who tipped off the media about your relationship with Lee." Nia felt her blood chill. "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone called the Seattle Times yesterday morning with specific information about where you and Lee would be having lunch, what time you'd be there, and which table would give photographers the best angle for pictures." "How do you know this?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot of a text message conversation. "My cousin works at the Times." She mentioned that a woman with a Korean accent called in the tip about the Billionaire CEO and his American nurse girlfriend. The caller knew enough details to suggest she had inside information. Nia stared at the evidence, feeling betrayal settle in her chest like a weight. His mother. That would be my guess. She orchestrated this entire media circus to force him to choose between me and his career, and to make sure that choice felt impossible by destroying your professional reputation in the process, Marcus added grimly. "It's actually pretty brilliant, if you ignore the human cost." Nia sank into one of the plastic chairs they'd salvaged from a waiting room renovation. "She's not just trying to protect her son. She's trying to eliminate me as an option entirely. Probably." Marcus sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "The question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? She has unlimited resources, political connections, and a family empire to protect. I'm a pediatric nurse with student loans and a grandmother who depends on my health insurance. You can fight." "How?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice intense with conviction. "You can refuse to be intimidated. You can show up to Lee's board meeting this morning and make it clear that you're not going anywhere just because some rich woman wants you to disappear." "Marcus, I can't." "You can," he interrupted. "And you should. Because if you don't, You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you gave up too easily on the best thing that ever happened to you. Nia looked at her friend, the man who had confessed his love for her just yesterday and was now encouraging her to fight for someone else, and felt her heart break a little at the generosity of his support. "Why are you helping me do this?" she asked quietly. Marcus smiled, the expression sad but genuine. "Because I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. And because I've watched you take care of everyone else for 5 years while telling yourself you don't deserve the same care in return. It's time for that to change." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Jae-hyun's name appeared on the screen, and she answered immediately. "Nia." His voice was tight with stress. "Where are you?" "At the hospital." "Why?" "My mother just informed me that she's arranged a press conference for this afternoon. She intends to announce that the Lee family is grateful for your professional services during a difficult time, but that any suggestions of romantic involvement are unfounded and inappropriate. She's going to publicly humiliate me." "She's going to try," Jae-hyun corrected, "but only if we let her control the narrative." "What do you mean?" "I mean we hold our own press conference first. We tell our story, our way, before she gets the chance to rewrite it." Nia felt panic rising in her throat. "Jae-hyun, I can't handle that kind of public attention. The questions, the scrutiny, the judgment." "You won't be alone," he said firmly. "We'll face it together. But Nia, if we don't fight for this now, we'll never get another chance. The board meeting is in 2 hours, and after that, everything changes." Marcus was watching her face intently, and she could see him urging her silently to choose courage over safety. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said into the phone. "I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to believe that what we've built together is worth defending. And I'm asking you to stand beside me when I tell the world that some things matter more than money or family expectations or public opinion." Nia closed her eyes, thinking of Minjun's laughter, of the way Jae-hyun's face softened when he looked at both of them together, of the family they had been building in quiet moments that felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. "Where and when?" she asked. "Lee Industries' Seattle office, 1 hour from now." "Nia?" "Yes?" "Whatever happens after today, I want you to know that loving you has been the most important thing I've ever done." After she hung up, Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "How can you be sure?" "Because for the first time since I've known you, you're choosing yourself, instead of choosing what you think other people expect from you. That's always the right choice." As Nia prepared to leave the hospital and walk into the most challenging situation of her life, she realized that Marcus was right about one thing. She had spent so many years taking care of other people that she had forgotten she deserved to fight for her own happiness. The question was whether she had found that courage soon enough to save what mattered most. The Lee Industries' Seattle headquarters had been transformed into a media circus by the time Nia arrived. News vans lined the street, photographers clustered around the building entrance, and reporters spoke into cameras with the kind of breathless excitement reserved for scandals involving the wealthy and powerful. Nia sat in her car across the street, watching the chaos and fighting the urge to drive away. Everything about this situation went against her natural instincts for privacy and professional discretion. But as she thought about Minjun's trusting smile and Jae-hyun's growing courage in choosing love over obligation, she found the strength to step out of her car and face the crowd. Security guards escorted her through a side entrance to avoid the bulk of the media attention, but she could still hear the shouted questions and camera shutters clicking as they recognized her arrival. Jae-hyun was waiting in a conference room on the 40th floor, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that emphasized his executive authority while somehow not diminishing the vulnerability she had come to recognize in his dark eyes. He rose immediately when she entered, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "You came," he said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would, but I wouldn't have blamed you for choosing to protect yourself instead of standing in front of cameras to defend something the whole world seems determined to destroy." Nia squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his presence. "Where's Minjun?" Safe with Sarah, my assistant. Whatever happens today, I didn't want him exposed to this chaos. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the media crowd growing larger as more news organizations arrived to cover what had become the most significant Korean business story of the year. "Are you sure about this?" Nia asked. "Once we do this press conference, there's no taking it back. Your family, the board, Korean society, they'll all see it as an open declaration of war against everything they expect from you." An Jae-hyun cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Nia, for 34 years I've lived according to other people's expectations. I've made every decision based on duty, honor, family obligation, and corporate responsibility. And you know what I learned?" "What?" "That a life lived entirely for other people isn't really a life at all. It's just an extended performance of someone else's script." Before she could respond, James Park entered with final preparations for the press conference. He had arranged for a podium, microphones, and a backdrop featuring the Lee Industries logo, the trappings of corporate authority that would lend weight to whatever Jae-hyun was about to announce. "Sir," James said carefully, "I've prepared several versions of possible statements, depending on what approach you decide to take. The most conservative option expresses gratitude for Miss Harrington's professional services while clarifying that any romantic speculation is unfounded. The most aggressive option won't be necessary," Jae-hyun interrupted. "I don't need prepared statements, James. I'm going to tell the truth. Sir, with respect, sometimes the truth isn't the most strategic. The truth is the only strategy that matters now." 10 minutes later, Nia found herself standing slightly behind Jae-hyun at a podium facing dozens of cameras and reporters representing media organizations from around the world. The questions came immediately, shouted in English and Korean, focused on everything from corporate governance to family scandal to the implications for Korean-American business relationships. Jae-hyun raised his hand for silence, and the room gradually quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I want to address the speculation about my personal life and its connection to my role at Lee Industries." He paused, looking directly into the cameras with the confidence of someone who had finally decided to stop hiding from difficult truths. 3 weeks ago, I lost my sister and brother-in-law in a car accident that left my 8-month-old nephew orphaned and traumatized. I came to Seattle to take responsibility for his care, but I had no experience with children, no understanding of trauma recovery, and no idea how to help a baby who had lost everything. His voice cracked slightly, and Nia saw him fighting to maintain composure as he continued. "Miss Nia Harrington, the pediatric nurse standing beside me, saved my nephew's life and my sanity during the darkest period I've ever experienced. She taught me how to care for Min-jun, but more importantly, she taught me how to love him. She showed me that family isn't about blood or tradition or corporate succession. It's about showing up every day for the people who matter most." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in for close-ups, and Nia felt the weight of hundreds of eyes assessing every aspect of her appearance and demeanor. "Over the past 3 weeks, I've fallen in love with Miss Harrington. Not because she's beautiful, though she is. Not because she's intelligent and compassionate, though she's both. I've fallen in love with her because she saw a broken man and a traumatized child, and instead of walking away, she taught us both how to heal." The room erupted in shouted questions, but Jae-hyun continued speaking over the noise. "This morning, the Lee Industries Board of Directors demanded that I choose between my position as CEO and my relationship with Miss Harrington. They made it clear that maintaining both was unacceptable to the family shareholders and inconsistent with Korean cultural expectations." Nia felt her heart stop as she realized what he was about to announce. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as Chief Executive Officer of Lee Industries." The media chaos was instant and overwhelming. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting, phones ringing as news organizations scrambled to update their coverage of this unprecedented development. But Nia barely heard the commotion because Jae-hyun had turned to face her directly, his eyes bright with tears, but his expression radiant with the kind of joy that comes from finally choosing authenticity over approval. "I am resigning," he continued, speaking to her as much as to the cameras. Because I've learned that some things are more valuable than corporate empires. Love is more valuable. Family is more valuable. The courage to build something new is more valuable than the security of maintaining something old. He reached for her hands, holding them openly in front of the assembled media representatives. Miss Harrington, you asked me once what kind of future I wanted to build. Today I can answer that question. I want to build a future where Min-jun grows up knowing that love conquered fear, where he understands that true strength comes from vulnerability, and where he learns that the most important legacy we can leave is the courage to choose what's right over what's expected. Tears were flowing freely down Nia's cheeks now, but she managed to find her voice. And I want to build that future with you, she said into the microphones, her words carrying to millions of people who would dissect and debate and judge this moment for years to come. As Jae-hyun leaned forward to kiss her, gently, sweetly, with complete disregard for the cameras recording every second, Nia realized that Marcus had been absolutely right. Sometimes the most dangerous choice was the one you didn't make. But sometimes, choosing love over safety was the most courageous thing you could do, even when the whole world was watching. The aftermath of the press conference felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Within hours, the story had gone viral across social media platforms, Korean news networks, and international business publications. Lee Industries scandal and love over duty trended on Twitter, while commentators debated everything from Korean cultural values to corporate governance to the role of foreigners in chaebol family dynamics. Nia's phone had been ringing continuously with calls from reporters, distant relatives, nursing colleagues, and strangers who had somehow obtained her number. She'd finally turned it off and retreated to her grandmother's house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, seeking the comfort of familiar surroundings and unconditional love. "Baby girl," Dolores Harrington said, as she set a cup of chamomile tea on the kitchen table. "You look like you've been through a war." At 73, Nia's grandmother remained the strongest person she knew, a retired school principal who had raised her after her parents' divorce, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for Nia's nursing education, and who had never once suggested that her granddaughter's dreams were too big or too difficult to achieve. "I feel like I've been through a war, Grandmama." Nia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from the ritual of tea and conversation that had sustained them both through every crisis of her adult life. "Tell me about this man," Dolores said simply. Nia found herself describing Jae-hyun not as the billionaire CEO the media portrayed, but as the lost, grieving uncle who had whispered, "I can't do this," in a hospital room 3 weeks earlier. She told her grandmother about his gentle hands learning to change diapers, his awkward attempts at singing lullabies in 2 languages, his growing confidence as Min-jun began to trust him completely. "He sounds like a good man who was raised to believe that love is secondary to duty," Dolores observed. "He is, but his family sees me as a threat to everything they've built. His mother offered me money to disappear. The Korean media is portraying me as a gold digger, and the board of directors basically forced him to choose between me and his responsibilities to thousands of employees. And he chose you. He chose us. Me and Min-jun. He gave up a billion-dollar empire to build something new." Dolores studied her granddaughter's face with the attention of someone who had spent decades reading the emotions of young people in crisis. "But you're not sure it was the right choice," she said quietly. Nia felt fresh tears beginning to form. "What if I'm not worth it, Grandmama? What if he wakes up in 6 months and realizes he gave up everything for a pediatric nurse from Beacon Hill who can't even keep her job at the hospital?" "Child," Dolores reached across the table and took Nia's hands. "You've been carrying guilt about your brother's death for so long that you've forgotten what you deserve. You think love is something other people get to have while you take care of everyone else's problems. That's exactly what it is," Dolores interrupted gently. "You became a pediatric nurse because you couldn't save Marcus Jr., and you've been trying to save every other child since then to somehow balance the scales. But baby girl, love isn't something you earn through service. Love is something you accept when it's offered freely." Before Nia could respond, the doorbell rang. They both looked toward the front of the house, knowing that reporters had been camped outside for hours, hoping for interviews or photographs. "I'll handle them," Dolores said, rising with the authority of a woman who had faced down unruly teenagers for 30 years. But when she opened the door, it wasn't reporters waiting on the front porch. "Mrs. Harrington." Jae-hyun stood on the steps holding Min-jun, both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by their first visit to this neighborhood of modest houses and tree-lined streets, so different from the glass towers of downtown Seattle. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I was hoping to speak with Naya." Dolores studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent decades determining which young men were worthy of her granddaughter's attention. "You're the one who gave up all that money," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am. And you're the one who's been taking care of this beautiful baby." Min-jun chose that moment to offer one of his irresistible smiles, reaching toward Dolores with the complete trust of a child who had learned that most adults could be counted on for kindness. "Well, come on in then," Dolores said, stepping aside. "We need to have a conversation." Nia appeared in the living room doorway as Jae-hyun entered, and the sight of him holding Min-jun in her childhood home created an emotional collision that left her momentarily speechless. Two worlds that had never been meant to intersect were suddenly overlapping in ways that felt both impossible and absolutely right. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Marcus gave me your address. He said you'd probably need some time to process everything that happened today, but that you'd want to know Min-jun was safe." Dolores intercepted the baby with the practiced ease of someone who had helped raise multiple generations of children. "Let me hold this sweet boy while you two talk. There's coffee in the kitchen if you want privacy." As they settled at the small kitchen table where Naya had done homework, shared late-night conversations, and made every important decision of her adult life, she felt the surreal quality of watching her past and future collide in real time. "The board accepted your resignation," she said. "They didn't have much choice after the press conference. The interim CEO takes over Monday morning, and I'll spend the next few weeks transferring my responsibilities and liquidating my personal holdings. Any regrets?" Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment, listening to Min-jun's delighted laughter echoing from the living room, where Dolores was clearly entertaining him with some combination of songs and silly faces. "None," he said finally. "For the first time in my adult life, I made a decision based on what felt right instead of what was expected. That's worth more than any corporate title. But what happens now? You gave up your entire life for this relationship, but we've never even discussed what we want from each other long term. What if we're not compatible outside of crisis situations? What if the cultural differences become too much? What if—" "Nia," Jae-hyun interrupted gently. "Are you looking for reasons to protect yourself from disappointment?" The question hit like a gentle slap, forcing her to confront the fear that had been driving her anxiety all day. "Maybe," she admitted. "I understand that impulse. I spent 30 years protecting myself from emotional risk by following predetermined paths and avoiding situations where I might fail or get hurt. But you taught me something important." "What?" "You taught me that the biggest risk isn't opening your heart to someone who might leave. The biggest risk is closing your heart to someone who might stay." From the living room came the sound of Min-jun's giggles, and Dolores singing what sounded suspiciously like a lullaby in both English and what she probably thought was Korean. "Your grandmother is remarkable," Jae-hyun observed. "She looked at me like she was deciding whether I deserved you, and I could tell she wasn't easily impressed. She raised me to believe I could do anything," Nia said. "But I think somewhere along the way, I started believing that meant I had to do everything alone." "You don't." Jae-hyun reached across the table to take her hands. "You don't have to save every child, heal every trauma, or earn love through constant service to others. You're allowed to want something for yourself. And what if what I want is impossible? What do you want?" Nia looked around the kitchen that held 30 years of memories, birthday celebrations, homework sessions, heart-to-heart conversations about boys and dreams, and the future that had always seemed both infinite and uncertain. "I want to wake up every morning knowing that Min-jun feels safe and loved. I want to help him navigate growing up between two cultures without having to choose between them. I want to build something real with someone who sees me as a partner, not just a caregiver. And I want, she continued, meeting Jae-hyun's gaze directly, to believe that love can be stronger than fear, that family is what we choose to build rather than what we inherit, and that courage is possible even when you're terrified. Then let's build that, Jae-hyun said simply. Not because it's safe or guaranteed, but because it's worth trying. As Min-jun's laughter continued to fill the house with joy, Nia realized that Marcus had been right about one final thing. She deserved to be loved completely and unconditionally, and she deserved to love the same way in return. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept that gift when it was freely offered. If you're as captivated by this story of courage conquering convention as we are, consider subscribing to hear more tales of love that transforms everything in its path. The front page of the Seattle Times the next morning featured a photograph that would define the public narrative of their relationship for months to come. Jae-hyun and Nia walking out of her grandmother's house together, Min-jun in her arms, all three of them laughing at something Dolores had said from the front porch. The headline read, "Love Conquers Empire. Korean billionaire chooses family over fortune." But beneath the romantic surface story, journalists had begun digging deeper into the implications of Jae-hyun's resignation, the power struggle within Lee Industries, and the cultural significance of a Korean chaebol heir choosing an interracial relationship with an American healthcare worker. Dr. Martinez called Nia at 7 in the morning. "We need to talk." Her voice was carefully controlled, the tone Nia recognized as the one used for delivering difficult news to worried families. "I'll be there in an hour," Nia replied, though her stomach was already churning with anticipation of another professional catastrophe. The hospital felt different as she walked through corridors that had been her second home for 5 years. Some colleagues offered supportive smiles, others seemed suddenly very busy with paperwork when she passed, and the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached made it clear that her personal life had become the subject of hospital-wide speculation. Dr. Martinez's office contained 2 additional occupants when Nia arrived: the chief of staff and a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as the hospital's head of public relations. "Nia, please sit," Dr. Martinez began. "We need to discuss the media attention your relationship with Mr. Lee has brought to the hospital." The public relations director opened a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be hundreds of online articles, social media posts, and news segments. "The coverage has been extensive," she said in the tone of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "Korean media outlets are portraying this as a scandal that reflects poorly on traditional family values. American publications are treating it as a romantic fairy tale. Both approaches have resulted in significant attention focused on St. Mary's Hospital and our pediatric department." "What kind of attention?" Nia asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Phone calls from reporters asking about your employment history, your qualifications, your previous relationships with patients' families. Social media posts speculating about whether you targeted Mr. Lee specifically because of his wealth. Korean blogs questioning whether the hospital has appropriate oversight of staff who work with international patients." Nia felt the walls closing in around her. "What are you saying?" The chief of staff leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. "We're saying that the hospital board has concerns about the ongoing media scrutiny and its impact on our reputation, particularly our relationships with the Korean medical community and potential international partnerships. They want me to resign," Nia said flatly. "They want you to consider a temporary leave of absence while the media attention subsides," Dr. Martinez corrected. "Potentially with reassignment to a different department when you return." "A different department, meaning anywhere but pediatrics, where I might work with vulnerable families." "Nia," the public relations director said gently, "I want you to understand that this isn't about questioning your professionalism or your commitment to patient care. But the hospital has to consider the broader impact of this situation on our staff, our patients, and our ability to serve the community effectively." What she didn't say, but what everyone in the room understood, was that Nia had become a liability, not because of any professional misconduct, but because she had chosen to love someone whose world operated according to different rules than the ones that governed her own life. After agreeing to consider the hospital's proposal, Nia walked to the pediatric ward one more time, knowing it might be her last day working in the place where she had found her professional identity and personal mission. Marcus was waiting at the nurse's station, his expression grim. "I heard about the meeting with Martinez. Good news travels fast around here." "This is bullshit, Nia. You're the best pediatric nurse this hospital has ever had, and they're willing to sacrifice you to avoid uncomfortable conversations with wealthy donors. They're trying to protect the hospital's reputation. I understand their position." "No, you don't," Marcus said with surprising intensity. "You're making excuses for people who are abandoning you when you need support most, just like you always do when someone puts institutional interests ahead of your well-being." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from Jae-hyun. She answered immediately, stepping into an empty patient room for privacy. "How did the hospital meeting go?" he asked without preamble. "How did you know about the meeting?" "Because I've been fielding calls from Korean media outlets all morning asking about your professional conduct and whether there are any irregularities in your employment history. Someone has been feeding them information designed to make you look opportunistic or unprofessional." Nia felt her blood chill. "Your mother. Almost certainly. She's trying to destroy your reputation so thoroughly that I'll have no choice but to distance myself from you to protect you from further damage." "Maybe she's right." "What?" "Maybe I should step back before this gets worse. The hospital wants me to take a leave of absence. Korean media outlets are questioning my motives, and your family will never accept me. Maybe the smart thing is to—" "The smart thing," Jae-hyun interrupted, "is to stop letting other people determine the value of our relationship. Nia, are you willing to fight for this, or are you looking for an honorable way to surrender?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Through the patient room window, she could see the pediatric playground where children recovering from surgeries or dealing with chronic conditions found moments of joy despite their circumstances. For 5 years, she had drawn strength from their resilience, their ability to hope even in difficult situations. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of facing whatever pressure my family or the media can bring to bear. And what if this pressure never stops? What if your mother continues trying to destroy my reputation? The hospital blacklists me from working with children, and we spend the rest of our lives dealing with scandal and scrutiny. Then we deal with it together," Jae-hyun said simply. "That's what people do when they love each other. They face difficulties as a team instead of facing them alone." After she hung up, Nia stood in the empty hospital room thinking about courage and compromise, about the dreams she had sacrificed for other people's comfort, and the future she was afraid to claim for herself. Marcus appeared in the doorway, having clearly been waiting for her conversation to end. "Decision time," he said quietly. "I know. What are you going to do?" Nia looked out at the pediatric ward where she had learned that love was stronger than fear, that healing required courage, and that some things were worth fighting for even when victory seemed impossible. "I'm going to choose love over safety," she said finally, "even if it costs me everything else," as she walked out of St. Mary's Hospital. For what might be the last time as an employee, Nia realized that sometimes the most important choice wasn't between right and wrong, but between fear and courage. And for the first time in her adult life, she was choosing courage. Madame Lee Suk-jin's suite at the Four Seasons Hotel reflected the controlled elegance that characterized everything about her approach to life. The sitting room was arranged like a boardroom, with formal chairs positioned to create subtle hierarchies of power and influence. When she invited Nia to join her for afternoon tea, the invitation carried the weight of a royal summons. Nia arrived wearing her best dress, navy blue, conservative cut, minimal jewelry, understanding that this meeting would determine whether the relationship she was fighting for could survive the full force of Lee family opposition. "Miss Harrington." Madame Lee rose with the grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Thank you for extending it." They settled into chairs positioned across from each other like opponents in a chess match, with a coffee service between them that somehow felt more like a negotiating table than a social amenity. "I assume you know why I asked to speak with you privately," Madame Lee began. "I assume it has to do with convincing me to end my relationship with your son. It has to do with protecting everyone involved from making decisions they will regret for the rest of their lives." Madame Lee poured tea with the precise movements of someone who used ritual as a form of control. "Miss Harrington, may I speak plainly?" "Please do." "My son has never rebelled against family expectations. He has never prioritized personal desires over professional obligations. He has never made impulsive decisions based on emotion, rather than logic." She handed Nia a delicate porcelain cup. "Until he met you. I didn't ask him to give up his position at Lee Industries." "No, but you accepted his sacrifice as proof of his commitment to you. Do you understand what that sacrifice will cost him?" Nia felt the conversation moving into territory where she was clearly outmatched by someone who had spent decades navigating high-stakes negotiations. "He'll lose his corporate authority, his family inheritance, and his position in Korean society," Madame Lee continued. "He'll become a pariah among his peers, an embarrassment to the Lee family legacy, and a cautionary tale about the dangers of choosing Western individualism over Korean duty. But he'll be free to make his own choices about his life. Will he?" Madame Lee leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. "Or will he spend the next 30 years dealing with the consequences of this decision? What happens when the romance fades and the reality sets in? What happens when Min-jun grows up and asks why his uncle threw away billions of dollars for a temporary attraction?" Nia felt each word like a carefully placed cut. "You think our relationship is temporary?" "I think all relationships face challenges, but intercultural relationships face pressures that can destroy even the strongest bonds," Madame Lee replied, with calculated precision. "The cultural differences, the family disapproval, the constant scrutiny, the need to choose between competing loyalties." She reached into her purse and withdrew a leather portfolio, placing it on the table between them. "This time, I'm not offering you money to disappear," she said quietly. "This time, I'm offering you something more valuable." Nia opened the portfolio to find legal documents written in both English and Korean. "This is a formal adoption agreement that would make you Min-jun's legal guardian," Madame Lee explained. "Full custody, complete financial support for his education and health care, and a trust fund that ensures his security for life." Nia's breath caught. "What's the catch?" "You raise him in Korea as part of the Lee family. You learn Korean language and customs. You accept the role of his guardian while allowing the family to participate in his cultural education. And Jae-hyun would remain in his position as CEO, would fulfill his family obligations, and would visit regularly to maintain his relationship with his nephew." The proposal was brilliant in its cruelty. It offered Nia everything she claimed to want for Min-jun, while requiring her to sacrifice the very relationship that had brought them together. "You're asking me to give up the man I love to become the mother of the child we both care about," Nia said slowly. "I'm asking you to consider what's truly best for Min-jun's future. In Korea, he would grow up connected to his heritage, surrounded by family, with access to the best education and opportunities money can provide. And in America? In America, he would grow up as the mixed-race child of a failed intercultural relationship, watching his guardian struggle with the aftermath of choosing love over practical considerations." Madame Lee stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. "Miss Harrington, I'm not your enemy. I'm a mother trying to protect my son from making the same mistakes my daughter made. Soo Jin chose love over family duty, and it cost her life. That's not fair. The accident had nothing to do with her choices. Didn't it?" Madame Lee turned back to face her. "If she had stayed in Korea, married appropriately, raised her son within our family structure, would she have been driving to an airport in a foreign country during a storm? Would she have been isolated from the support systems that might have prevented her death?" The logic was twisted but effective, designed to plant seeds of doubt about whether love could truly triumph over practical considerations, and family wisdom. What if I refuse your proposal? Then you'll watch my son sacrifice everything for a relationship that statistics suggest has less than a 30% chance of lasting more than 5 years, Madame Lee replied. You'll see him become increasingly bitter as the weight of his losses settles in. You'll watch Min-jun grow up wondering why his uncle's love for you was worth more than his family legacy. Nia stared at the legal documents, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. Accept the proposal, and she could provide Min-jun with security, cultural connection, and financial resources while sacrificing her own happiness. Refuse, and she might be condemning all three of them to a future filled with regret and recrimination. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Miss Harrington, consider this. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, even when it breaks your heart to do so. As Nia left the hotel carrying the adoption documents, she realized that Madame Lee had succeeded in doing what threats and money could not accomplish. She had made Nia question whether fighting for love was an act of courage or an act of selfishness. That evening, Nia sat in her grandmother's living room with the adoption papers spread across the coffee table like evidence of an impossible choice. Dolores had read through the documents twice, her expression growing more troubled with each page. This woman is smart, Dolores said finally. Evil, but smart. She's not evil, Grandmama. She's protecting her family. She's manipulating you into believing that sacrificing your happiness is somehow noble. Dolores leaned back in her recliner, studying her granddaughter's face. Baby girl, this proposal is designed to make you feel guilty for wanting love. Nia's phone had been buzzing with calls from Jae-hyun for the past hour, but she hadn't been able to bring herself to answer. How could she explain that his mother had offered her everything she claimed to want for Min-jun, but only if she was willing to give up everything she wanted for herself? Maybe she's right, Nia said quietly. Maybe I'm being selfish by encouraging him to throw away his entire life for a relationship that might not survive the pressure. Or maybe, Dolores replied, you're looking for an honorable way to run away from the best thing that's ever happened to you. Before Nia could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the front window, she could see Jae-hyun's silhouette on the porch, Min-jun in his arms. I'll get it, Dolores said, rising with the authority of someone who had been managing family crises for 70 years. Nia heard muted conversation from the entryway, followed by Dolores's voice carrying the tone she used for delivering uncomfortable truths. She's in the living room, but son, she's hurting right now. Whatever your mother said to her today has her questioning everything she thought she knew about love and sacrifice. Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway, his expression immediately taking in the legal documents scattered across the coffee table and Nia's tear-stained face. She made you an offer, he said, not really a question. She made Min-jun an offer, Nia corrected, standing to take the baby who immediately settled against her chest with the trusting contentment that had become achingly familiar. Full custody, financial security, the best education money can buy. In exchange for what? In exchange for me raising him in Korea as part of the Lee family, while you remain CEO and fulfill your obligations to the company and board. Jae-hyun sat heavily on the sofa, running his hands through his hair. So she's offering you everything you want for Min-jun, but only if you give up everything you want for yourself. What if she's right? Nia's voice cracked. What if the statistics about intercultural relationships are accurate? What if the cultural pressures and family disapproval eventually destroy what we're trying to build? What if 5 years from now you wake up regretting everything you sacrificed? And what if 5 years from now I wake up grateful every day that I chose love over fear? Min-jun began fussing, as if sensing the emotional tension between the adults who had become his world. Nia automatically began the swaying motion that always calmed him, but her movements were mechanical, distracted. Jae-hyun, she said quietly, I've been thinking about what your mother said about Soo-jin, about how choosing love over family duty might have contributed to her death. That's emotional manipulation, not logic. Is it? If your sister had stayed in Korea, married someone your family approved of, would she still be alive? I don't know, Jae-hyun admitted. but I know that she was happy with her choices. She loved her husband, she loved her son, and she was building the life she wanted instead of the life our parents planned for her. And now she's dead, and Minjun is an orphan, and you're being forced to choose between your family legacy and a relationship with someone who might not be strong enough to handle the pressure. Dolores, who had been listening from the kitchen, suddenly appeared with the kind of determined expression that meant she was done letting other people control the conversation. "Naya Harrington," she said with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak uncomfortable truths, "doing your own happiness for 5 years after Marcus Jr. died. You're convincing yourself that wanting love is somehow selfish, that other people's comfort matters more than your own well-being." She moved to stand directly in front of Nia, her small frame somehow commanding the entire room. "That woman didn't offer you custody of Minjun out of generosity. She offered it because she knows you'd rather sacrifice yourself than risk disappointing the people you care about. She's counting on you to choose martyrdom over happiness." Jae-hyun looked between Nia and her grandmother, beginning to understand the deeper psychological warfare his mother had employed. "Nia," he said gently, "what do you want? Not what you think is best for everyone else. Not what would make my mother happy or protect me from consequences. What do you want?" Minjun had fallen asleep in her arms, his breathing steady and peaceful despite the chaos of adult emotions surrounding him. Nia looked down at his small face, seeing traces of Sujin's features mixed with his father's, and realized that he represented not just a child who needed care, but the possibility of a family built on choice rather than obligation. "I want to wake up every morning in a house filled with laughter," she whispered. "I want Minjun to grow up knowing he's loved unconditionally, without having to choose between different parts of his identity. I want to build something real with someone who sees me as a partner, not just a caregiver. And I want," she continued, looking directly at Jae-hyun, "to stop being afraid that happiness is something I don't deserve." Jae-hyun rose and moved to stand beside her, his hand gently stroking Minjun's hair. "Then let's choose happiness," he said simply. "Let's choose each other, even if it's difficult. Let's show Minjun that love is worth fighting for, even when the whole world thinks you're making the wrong choice." "And what about the adoption papers? What about them?" Nia looked down at the legal documents that offered security in exchange for sacrifice, then back at the man who had given up a billion-dollar empire for the possibility of building something authentic. "I think," she said slowly, "that some offers are designed to test whether you understand the difference between what's safe and what's right." As she carefully placed the adoption documents in her grandmother's fireplace, watching the flames consume what might have been the practical choice, Nia realized that courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about being afraid and choosing love anyway. The next morning, Marcus appeared at Dolores's front door carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had made a decision that would cost him everything he wanted, but might save the person he loved most. "We need to talk," he said, when Nia opened the door. "All of us." 15 minutes later, the unlikely group sat around Dolores's kitchen table. Naya holding Minjun, Jae-hyun looking cautiously hopeful, Marcus wearing determination like armor, and Dolores presiding over the gathering with the wisdom of someone who had lived through enough family drama to recognize turning points when they appeared. "I have information about Madame Lee's campaign to destroy Nia's reputation," Marcus began without preamble. "And I have a proposal that might level the playing field." He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward them. "My cousin at the Seattle Times? She did some investigating after I asked her about the tip that led to your restaurant photographs. The calls didn't just come from Madame Lee." The screen showed a complex network of communication records, financial transfers, and media connections. She hired a Korean public relations firm that specializes in managing Chaebol family scandals. They've been coordinating a systematic campaign to portray Nia as opportunistic and unprofessional while simultaneously painting Jae-hyun as a victim of emotional manipulation. Nia felt her stomach drop. How extensive is the campaign? Extensive enough to potentially destroy your nursing career permanently, and to make Jae-hyun's business rehabilitation nearly impossible if he ever wants to work in Korean corporate culture again. Jae-hyun leaned forward, his expression darkening. What exactly are they planning? Marcus scrolled through several documents. Medical board complaints questioning Naya's professional conduct. Background investigations into her family finances. Media stories suggesting she targeted wealthy patients' families. And for you, he looked at Jae-hyun. Leaked stories about emotional instability and poor judgment under pressure that would make you unemployable in any major Korean corporation. Jesus, Dolores murmured. This woman doesn't play games. No, she doesn't, Marcus agreed. But she made one mistake. She assumed no one would investigate her methods or challenge her narrative. He pulled up another set of documents. I've been working with a legal advocacy organization that handles discrimination cases involving healthcare workers. They're prepared to file a federal complaint alleging harassment, defamation, and attempted economic sabotage based on racial and cultural bias. Nia stared at the screen. Marcus, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He turned to face her directly. I told you I loved you, and I meant it. But love isn't about possessing someone or convincing them to settle for safety. Love is about helping the person you care about fight for their happiness, even when that happiness doesn't include you. Jae-hyun looked at Marcus with new respect. What would this legal action accomplish? It would force Madame Lee to choose between continuing her campaign and facing public exposure of her methods. Korean corporate culture might accept family pressure and arranged marriages, but international business culture doesn't tolerate coordinated harassment campaigns against American healthcare workers. And the downside? The downside is that this becomes a very public, very ugly legal battle that could drag on for years. The upside is that you fight back instead of allowing yourselves to be systematically destroyed by someone who believes money and social status give her the right to control other people's lives. Dolores had been listening with the attention of someone who had spent decades watching powerful people abuse their authority over those with less resources. What do you think, baby girl? She asked Nia. Are you ready to stop running from this fight? Nia looked around the table at the people who had become her chosen family. Her grandmother, who had always believed she deserved better. Marcus, who loved her enough to help her fight for someone else. Jae-hyun, who had already sacrificed everything for the possibility of building something real together. And Min-jun, who represented the future they were all working to protect. I'm tired of being afraid, she said finally. I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think I deserve. And I'm tired of allowing bullies to win just because they have more money and social connections. So we fight? Jae-hyun asked. We fight, Nia confirmed. But not just against your mother's campaign. We fight for something positive. We fight to build the family we want, the life we want, the future we want Min-jun to inherit. Marcus smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him in weeks. Then let's get started. As they began planning their legal and public relations strategy, coordinating with advocacy organizations, and preparing for what would undoubtedly be a challenging battle, Nia realized that courage was contagious. When one person chose to fight for what was right instead of what was safe, it gave others permission to do the same. And sometimes, the most powerful weapon against institutional pressure and family manipulation was simply refusing to surrender to the belief that love wasn't worth fighting for. The crisis came without warning, as emergencies always do when life has already been pushed to its breaking point. Nia's phone rang at 3:47 a.m., jarring her from the restless sleep that had become her norm since the legal battle with Madame Lee began. Jae-hyun's voice was tight with panic. Min-jun has a fever. 104 degrees. We're at the emergency room. She was dressed and driving through empty Seattle streets within 5 minutes, her nursing training overriding every other emotion, except the primal fear that the child who had become the center of their world might be seriously ill. The pediatric emergency ward at Seattle Children's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos of medical professionals responding to a crisis. She found Jae-hyun in a family consultation room, still wearing pajama bottoms under his coat, his hair disheveled, and his eyes bright, with the kind of terror that parents learn to hide from their children, but never quite manage to hide from each other. Where is he? She asked immediately. With the doctors. They're running tests. His voice cracked slightly. Nia, he was fine when I put him to bed. Perfectly fine. And then I heard him crying, and when I went to check on him, he was burning up and barely responsive. She sat beside him, automatically taking his hand in the gesture that had become second nature over the past months. What are the doctors saying? They're not sure yet. Possible bacterial infection, maybe viral meningitis, could be a reaction to something he ate or touched. Jae-hyun turned to look at her directly. They asked about his medical history, any family predispositions to serious illness. I realized I don't know enough about his father's family medical background. Before she could respond, Dr. Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully professional but clearly concerned. Mr. Lee? Miss Harrington? She nodded to both of them. We need to discuss Minjun's condition. They followed her to a private office where Minjun's test results were displayed on a computer screen, like evidence of a crime neither of them understood. Minjun has developed what appears to be a severe immune system response to an unknown trigger, Dr. Chen explained. His white blood cell count is extremely elevated. His temperature remains dangerously high despite medication, and he's showing signs of systemic inflammation. What does that mean? Naya asked, though her nursing training had already provided several terrifying possibilities. It means his body is fighting something, but we haven't identified what yet. It could be bacterial, viral, or even an autoimmune response triggered by stress or environmental factors. Jae-hyun leaned forward. How serious is this? Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. Mr. Lee, I want you to know that we're doing everything possible, but Minjun's condition is critical. The next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial in determining whether his body can overcome whatever is causing this response. The words hit like physical blows. Nia felt the room spin slightly as the implications settled in her chest like ice water. Can we see him? She whispered. Of course. But I need to prepare you. He's sedated to help his body conserve energy for fighting the infection. He's on a ventilator to help with his breathing, and he has multiple IV lines for medication and fluids. The pediatric intensive care unit felt like entering a different world, one where machines beeped with mechanical precision, while tiny patients fought battles too big for their small bodies. Minjun's crib was surrounded by monitors and equipment that made him appear even smaller and more vulnerable than his 8 months would suggest. Oh, baby, Nia breathed, reaching through the crib rails to touch his forehead. His skin was still hot despite the medications, and his breathing was assisted by tubes and machines that had never been part of the gentle bedtime routines they had established together. Jae-hyun stood on the opposite side of the crib, his hand resting gently on Minjun's chest, as if he could somehow transfer his own strength to the child who had taught him how to love unconditionally. He's going to be okay, he said, though his voice carried more hope than conviction. He has to be okay. They settled into the uncomfortable chairs provided for family members maintaining vigils, taking turns holding Minjun's hand, and talking to him in the soft voices that had once been used for lullabies, but now carried prayers and promises, and desperate negotiations with whatever forces determined the fates of children and the families who loved them. By evening, there had been no improvement. Minjun's fever remained dangerously high. His body continued its mysterious battle against an unknown enemy, and the doctors spoke in increasingly cautious tones about monitoring the situation and remaining hopeful. Medical euphemisms that sounded more ominous than reassuring. That's when Madame Lee arrived. She entered the PICU with the controlled composure of someone who had learned to manage crises through force of will and meticulous planning. But her face went ashen when she saw her grandson connected to machines that were keeping him alive. How long has he been like this? She asked quietly, moving to stand beside Jae-hyun. Since early this morning, he replied, not looking away from Minjun's face. The doctors don't know what caused it. And for several minutes, the 3 adults stood around the crib in silence, their previous conflicts temporarily set aside by the more immediate concern of a child's life hanging in the balance. I brought a specialist from Seoul, Madame Lee said finally. Dr. Kim has experience with pediatric immune system disorders. He's reviewing Minjun's case with the hospital doctors now. Nia looked at her with surprise. Despite everything that had happened between them, Madame Lee had responded to her grandson's crisis by marshalling the best possible medical resources, regardless of cost or logistics. "Thank you," she said quietly. Madame Lee nodded, then did something neither Jae-hyun nor Nia had expected. She reached across the crib and took Nia's hand. "Miss Harrington," she said, her voice softer than it had ever been in their previous conversations. "I want you to know that regardless of our disagreements about other matters, I am grateful for how much you love my grandson. He is lucky to have someone who cares for him the way you do." The words broke something loose in Nia's chest, and tears began flowing freely for the first time since the crisis began. "He's the best little boy," she whispered. "He deserves every chance to grow up and be happy and laugh every day." "Yes," Madame Lee agreed simply. "He does." As night fell over Seattle, the three adults who had been locked in conflict over Minjun's future found themselves united by the more fundamental concern for his survival. And in the quiet of the pediatric intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that measured heartbeats and breathing and all the mechanical indicators of a life worth fighting for, they began to understand that love wasn't about winning or losing or controlling outcomes. Love was about showing up when everything else fell apart, and refusing to let go even when letting go might be easier than continuing to hope. The second night in the PICU stretched endlessly, marked by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hushed conversations of medical staff who spoke in the careful tones reserved for critical cases. Minjun's condition had stabilized, but not improved. His fever remained dangerously high, and his small body continued its mysterious battle against an enemy that defied easy diagnosis. Dr. Kim, the pediatric specialist Madame Lee had flown in from Seoul, emerged from his consultation with the American medical team, looking cautiously optimistic, but clearly concerned. "We have a working theory," he announced to the three adults who had maintained their vigil for 36 hours. "The blood work suggests this may be a delayed immune response to trauma, sometimes called pediatric PTSD, manifesting as physical illness." Nia felt her nursing training click into place. "You're saying his body is reacting to the emotional trauma of losing his parents?" "It's possible. Infants who experience severe psychological trauma sometimes develop physical symptoms months later, especially when their environment changes or they're exposed to additional stress." Jae-hyun looked stricken. "Additional stress like media attention, family conflict, and adults arguing about his future?" Dr. Kim nodded gently. "Children are remarkably sensitive to emotional tension, even when they can't understand the specifics. Minjun's system may have been overwhelmed by the combination of his original trauma and the recent upheaval in his caregiving environment." Madame Lee, who had been unusually quiet since her arrival, finally spoke. "What does this mean for his treatment?" "It means that medical intervention alone may not be sufficient. Minjun needs emotional stability, consistent caregiving, and an environment free from adult conflict and anxiety." The implications hung in the air, like an indictment of everything they had put him through in their battle over his future. "Dr. Kim," Nia said quietly, "what are his chances? With appropriate medical care and the right emotional environment, children his age have remarkable resilience. But the next 24 hours remain critical." After the doctor left, the three adults sat in uncomfortable silence, each processing their role in creating the stress that might have contributed to Minjun's crisis. "This is my fault," Jae-hyun said finally. "I should have prioritized his stability over everything else." "It's my fault," Madame Lee disagreed. "I created the conflict that disrupted his peace." "It's all of our faults," Nia said quietly. "We've been so focused on fighting each other that we forgot the most important thing was protecting him." She stood and moved closer to Minjun's crib, where the baby lay motionless except for the assisted rise and fall of his chest. His face was still flushed with fever, but he looked peaceful, as if he were simply sleeping deeply rather than fighting for his life. "I need to tell you both something," she continued, not turning away from Minjun. "Yesterday, before he got sick, I had decided to accept your adoption proposal," she said to Madame Lee. Jaehyun's sharp intake of breath was audible. I convinced myself that it would be better for him to grow up in Korea with family support and cultural connection than to be caught in the middle of our relationship drama. I thought I was being selfless, but I was really just being scared. She finally turned to face them both. But watching him fight for his life has made me realize that children don't need perfect situations or guaranteed outcomes. They need adults who love them enough to figure things out, even when it's difficult. Madam Lee studied Nia's face with new attention. And what have you figured out? I've figured out that Minjun doesn't need us to choose between Korean culture and American opportunity. He needs us to show him that he can be both, that love transcends cultural boundaries, and that family is something we build together rather than something we inherit. Jaehyun reached for her hand. What are you saying? I'm saying that when he recovers from this, I want us to raise him together. All of us. Not as competitors for his loyalty, but as a family that happens to span 2 cultures and 3 generations. Madame Lee was quiet for so long that Nia wondered if she had overstepped some crucial boundary. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability that neither of them had heard before. Miss Harrington, I owe you an apology. I have spent so much energy trying to protect my family from change that I forgot families are supposed to grow and evolve. My daughter taught me that, but I was too frightened to learn the lesson. She moved to stand beside Minjun's crib, her perfectly manicured hand resting gently on his forehead. Soojin chose love over duty, and I never forgave her for it. When she died, I convinced myself that her choices had led to her death, because admitting that some things are beyond our control was more frightening than blaming her for following her heart. Tears began to flow down her cheeks, the first display of unguarded emotion any of them had witnessed from her. But watching Minjun fight for his life has reminded me that control is an illusion. We cannot protect the people we love by dictating their choices. We can only love them and trust that love will be enough to sustain them through whatever challenges they face. At that moment, as if responding to the emotional breakthrough happening around his crib, Minjun stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered open for the first time in 2 days, and although he was still too weak to focus clearly, he made a soft sound that might have been recognition. Hey, little one, Naya whispered, leaning closer to the crib rails. We're all here. Your Uncle Jaehyun, your grandmother, and me. And we're not going anywhere. Minjun's eyes found her face, and for just a moment, his expression carried the trust and contentment that had made all of their battles seem worthwhile. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, having been alerted by the monitors to Minjun's increased activity. This is encouraging, she said, checking his vital signs. His temperature has dropped 2 degrees in the past hour, and his breathing is becoming less labored. Does this mean he's going to be okay? Jaehyun asked. It means we're cautiously optimistic. Children his age can recover quickly once their systems begin responding to treatment. As the medical team made adjustments to Minjun's care plan, the 3 adults who had learned to love him each in their own way finally understood that some battles were worth fighting, and some victories were worth sharing. But the most important lesson was that family wasn't about winning or losing or controlling outcomes. It was about showing up when everything fell apart and refusing to let go of hope, even when hope seemed like the most dangerous choice of all. The breakthrough came at dawn on the 3rd day, when Minjun's fever finally broke and his breathing became strong enough to remove the ventilator. Dr. Chen's cautious optimism had evolved into genuine relief, as test results showed his immune system was no longer in crisis mode. He's going to make a full recovery, she announced to the 3 exhausted adults who had maintained their vigil since the emergency began. Whatever triggered this response seems to have resolved itself. Jaehyun sank into a chair, the accumulated stress and fear of the past 72 hours finally catching up with him. Nia felt her knees go weak with relief, and even Madame Lee had to steady herself against the wall as the magnitude of what they had almost lost settled in their minds. But it was what happened next that would later be remembered as the moment when their improvised family finally found its foundation. Minjun, no longer sedated and breathing on his own, looked around the room with the alert curiosity of a child who had missed several days of important developments. His gaze moved from Jae-hyun to Madame Lee to Nia, as if taking inventory of the people who had kept vigil during his crisis. Then he smiled. Not the weak, tentative expression of a child recovering from illness, but the full, radiant smile that had first captured their hearts in a hospital room 8 weeks earlier. The smile that said he felt safe, loved, and confident that the adults in his world could be trusted to take care of him no matter what challenges arose. "There's our boy," Nia whispered, reaching through the crib rails to touch his hand. Minjun immediately grasped her finger with the strong grip of a healthy baby, and she felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Jae-hyun moved to stand beside her, his own eyes bright with emotion as he gently stroked Minjun's hair. "You scared us, little one. Please don't do that again." Madame Lee approached more slowly, her expression uncertain as she looked at the grandson she had nearly lost before fully understanding how much he meant to her. "May I hold him?" she asked, the question directed to both Jae-hyun and Nia. With Dr. Chen's permission, they carefully lifted Minjun from his crib and placed him in his grandmother's arms. The sight of Madame Lee, always so perfectly composed, so rigidly controlled, melting into soft vulnerability as she cradled her grandson, created a bridge between the woman she had been and the grandmother she was ready to become. "Minjuna," she whispered in Korean, her voice carrying the musical cadence of lullabies and love songs. "Halmeoni is here. Halmeoni loves you so much." Minjun studied her face with the serious attention babies give to new but important people, then reached up to touch the pearl brooch on her jacket, the family heirloom that had traveled from Seoul to Seattle to be present for this moment of healing. "He recognizes you," Nia observed softly. "Children remember more than we think," Madame Lee replied. "Perhaps he remembers that families can grow larger rather than smaller, if we're brave enough to let them." "Doctor." Chen returned with discharge papers and care instructions. Minjun would need continued monitoring and follow-up appointments, but he was stable enough to leave the hospital and return to normal routines. "There is one thing I want to discuss with all of you," she said, looking at the 3 adults who would be responsible for Minjun's continued care. "Given what we've learned about the possible connection between emotional stress and this medical crisis, I'd recommend that you establish a stable, consistent home environment for him." "What does that mean, specifically?" Jae-hyun asked. "It means no more upheaval in his daily routines, no more adults arguing about his future where he can sense the tension, and no more uncertainty about who will be caring for him long term. Children need predictability, especially children who have experienced trauma." The 3 adults looked at each other, understanding that they had reached the moment when good intentions and love would have to be translated into practical decisions about custody, living arrangements, and the daily realities of raising a child together despite their different backgrounds and expectations. "Doctor." "Chen," Madame Lee said slowly, "if we were to establish a shared custody arrangement that allowed Minjun to benefit from multiple caregivers while maintaining stability, what would that look like from a medical perspective?" "It would mean consistent bedtime routines, familiar faces for daily care, and adults who communicate with each other rather than arguing about conflicting approaches to parenting. It would mean prioritizing his needs over your personal preferences or cultural differences." After Dr. Chen left to finalize the discharge paperwork, the 3 adults sat in the family consultation room facing the most important negotiation of their lives. "I have a proposal," Madame Lee said quietly. "Not a demand or an ultimatum, but a genuine proposal for how we might build a family that honors all of our needs while prioritizing Minjun's well-being." Nia and Jae-hyun waited, both understanding that whatever came next would determine whether their love story would have a happy ending or dissolve under the weight of practical impossibilities. "I would like to establish a residence here in Seattle, close enough to be involved in Minjun's daily care, but far enough to respect your independence as a couple. I would like to learn English more fluently and understand American customs that will shape his identity. And I would like to teach him about Korean culture and language in ways that add to his life, rather than competing with his American experiences." She paused, looking directly at Naya. "In exchange, I would hope that you might consider learning some Korean language and customs, not because I require it, but because it would help Min-jun feel connected to all parts of his heritage. And what about the legal adoption papers? Nia asked. The legal adoption papers are void. Min-jun doesn't need to be adopted by anyone. He needs to be loved by everyone who is committed to his happiness. Jae-hyun reached for both women's hands, creating a circle of connection that included all three adults who had learned to put a child's needs before their own desires for control or certainty. Then let's build this together, he said simply. Let's show Min-jun that families can be complicated and imperfect and still be filled with love. As they prepared to leave the hospital with Min-jun healthy and alert in Nia's arms, all three adults understood that they were beginning a new chapter that would require patience, compromise, and the daily choice to prioritize love over fear. But they also understood that some things were worth the effort, and some families were worth building from scratch, even when the blueprint didn't match anything they had seen before. 6 months later, the house in the Queen Anne neighborhood reflected the successful merger of 3 cultures, 2 languages, and 1 shared commitment to raising a child who would never have to choose between the different parts of his identity. The living room featured Korean artwork, alongside African-American family photographs and modern American furniture that somehow managed to honor all traditions while creating something entirely new. Min-jun's nursery contained books in English and Korean, toys that represented multiple cultural influences, and a mobile that played lullabies in 3 different musical styles. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the physical space. It was in the relationships between the adults who had learned to navigate love across cultural boundaries, generational differences, and the daily challenges of shared parenting. Halmione is here, Nia called out as Madame Lee's car pulled into the driveway. Min-jun, now 14 months old and walking with the determined wobble of new independence, immediately began his excited journey toward the front door. Madame Lee had kept her promise to establish a Seattle residence, purchasing a condominium 20 minutes away that allowed her to be involved in Min-jun's daily routines, while respecting the space that Jae-hyun and Nia needed to build their own relationship. She had also kept her promise to learn English more fluently, though her progress was occasionally hindered by Min-jun's tendency to respond to her Korean phrases with delighted gibberish that made actual conversation secondary to pure enjoyment. Min-juna. Madame Lee swept him into her arms as she entered the house, her reserved demeanor instantly melting into the warmth she reserved for her grandson. Did you miss Halmione? Halmione! Min-jun replied with the clarity of a toddler who had learned that certain words guaranteed enthusiastic responses from the adults in his world. Jae-hyun appeared from the kitchen, where he had been attempting to prepare bulgogi with Nia's grandmother's assistance, a cultural cooking exchange that had become a weekly tradition filled with laughter, minor disasters, and surprisingly successful fusion cuisine. Yama, he greeted his mother with the bow that remained automatic, despite their increasingly informal relationship. How was your week? Productive, Madame Lee replied, settling onto the sofa with Min-jun on her lap. The Seoul office has agreed to establish a permanent American division with headquarters here in Seattle. It seems that my son's decision to prioritize family over corporate politics has inspired some interesting innovations in international business structure. This was Madame Lee's way of acknowledging that Jae-hyun's resignation from Lee Industries had ultimately led to positive changes in how the company approached work-life balance and global expansion. Rather than viewing his choice as abandonment of family duty, the board had eventually recognized it as evidence of leadership vision that extended beyond quarterly profit reports. Nia emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of tea and the kind of multicultural snack arrangement that had become standard in their household. Korean rice cakes alongside Southern biscuits, and baby-appropriate finger foods that Min-jun could share with the adults. Mrs. Lee, she said, using the formal address that had evolved into genuine respect rather than nervous politeness. Min-jun learned a new word this week. Show Halmione, Jae-hyun encouraged, crouching down to Min-jun's eye level. Min-jun looked around the room at the 3 adults who had become his world, then clapped his hands together and announced clearly, family. The word carried the weight of every struggle they had overcome, every compromise they had made, and every moment when love had proven stronger than fear, or cultural difference, or the human tendency to choose familiar difficulty over unfamiliar possibility. "Yes," Madame Lee said softly, pulling Minjun closer. "Family." As the afternoon progressed with the comfortable rhythm that had developed over months of shared routines, Nia found herself reflecting on how different this reality was from anything she could have imagined when she first encountered a desperate Korean executive and his inconsolable nephew in a hospital emergency room. The legal battles with the media had eventually resolved in their favor, with Marcus's advocacy organization successfully demonstrating that Madame Lee's campaign constituted harassment based on racial and cultural bias. Rather than facing public exposure of her methods, she had withdrawn the complaints and issued a private apology that acknowledged the dignity and professional competence of everyone involved. Nia had returned to work at Seattle Children's Hospital, where her colleagues had gradually moved past the sensational headlines to recognize her contributions to pediatric care and intercultural patient advocacy. Dr. Martinez had even approached her about developing training programs for healthcare workers who serve diverse patient populations. But the most significant changes were personal rather than professional. "Nia," Jae-hyun said as they cleaned up after dinner, "I have something I want to discuss with you." Minjun was playing in the living room under his grandmother's watchful supervision, their voices creating a musical background of Korean and English, mixed with the universal language of adult patience and child delight. "Should I be worried?" Nia asked, noting the careful seriousness in his tone. "I hope not." He dried his hands on a kitchen towel and turned to face her directly. "These past months have taught me something important about the difference between obligation and choice. Okay. I was raised to believe that love was something that happened to you, that you managed as best you could while fulfilling more important responsibilities. But loving you has taught me that real love is something you choose every day, something you build through thousands of small decisions to prioritize partnership over convenience." Nia felt her heart skip as she began to understand where this conversation was leading. "I don't want to love you because it's expected or required or socially appropriate," Jae-hyun continued. "I want to love you because every morning I wake up grateful for the chance to build a life with someone who makes me better than I thought I could be." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made her breath catch. "Nia Harrington," he said, dropping to one knee in their multicultural kitchen, while Minjun's laughter echoed from the living room. "Will you marry me not because it's practical or expected, but because you choose me the same way I choose you, every day, despite the difficulties? Because what we're building together is worth every challenge we've faced and every one we'll face in the future." The ring was beautiful in its simplicity, a solitaire diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like promises of all the bright moments yet to come. But what took her breath away wasn't the jewelry. It was the recognition that this proposal represented the culmination of a year-long journey from desperate strangers to chosen family. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will marry you because I choose you too." As Jae-hyun slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her with the joy of someone who had finally learned the difference between duty and desire, Minjun's delighted squeals from the living room reminded them that some families are born from love rather than blood, and some love stories begin with crisis and end with the most beautiful kind of ordinary happiness. "Family," Minjun announced again from the doorway, having escaped his grandmother's supervision to investigate the commotion in the kitchen. "Yes, sweet boy," Nia said, lifting him into her arms as Jae-hyun wrapped them both in an embrace that included past and future, loss and hope, Korean tradition and American possibility. "Family." And as Madame Lee appeared in the kitchen doorway with tears in her eyes and pride in her smile, all four of them understood that sometimes the most radical act is choosing to build something new while honoring everything that came before. The wedding took place in the Queen Anne neighborhood garden behind their house, on a crisp October morning when the Seattle sky had cleared to reveal the kind of brilliant blue that made the Pacific Northwest feel like a promise of endless possibility. The guest list reflected the multicultural family they had become. Dolores in her best purple dress, sitting beside Korean relatives who had flown from Seoul to witness this union of traditions. Marcus in his wedding guest suit, serving as one of Jaehyun's groomsmen alongside James Park and Dr. Chen, who had become friends rather than just medical colleagues. Colleagues from the hospital mixed with former Lee Industries executives who had chosen to support their former CEO's new life direction. But the most important guest was Min Jun, now 16 months old and walking with confident steps, as he served as ring bearer with the assistance of both grandmothers who guided him down the aisle. The ceremony itself had been carefully designed to honor both Korean and American traditions. A traditional Korean paebek ceremony in the morning had allowed them to formally receive blessings from family elders, with Min Jun participating by offering dates and chestnuts that symbolized wishes for children and prosperity. The American ceremony in the afternoon included vows they had written themselves, exchanged in both English and Korean to ensure that every family member could understand the promises being made. "I promise," Nia said, standing before Jaehyun in the garden where they had spent countless evenings teaching Min Jun to walk on grass, to choose love over fear, family over convenience, and courage over safety, every day for the rest of our lives. "I promise," Jaehyun replied, "to build with you a home where Min Jun can grow up knowing that love transcends cultural boundaries, where he never has to choose between the different parts of his identity, and where family is defined by commitment rather than convention." The officiant, a Korean-American pastor who understood the significance of intercultural marriage within traditional family structures, pronounced them husband and wife in both languages, creating a bridge between worlds that their children would inherit as birthright rather than struggle to build. The reception featured a menu that reflected their fusion approach to life: Korean barbecue alongside Southern comfort food, traditional wedding cake next to Korean rice cakes, champagne toasts mixed with tea ceremonies that honored ancestors while celebrating the future. But the moment that would be remembered by everyone present came during the first dance, when Min Jun escaped his grandmother's supervision and toddled onto the dance floor to join his parents' romantic moment. Rather than lifting him off to the side, Jaehyun and Nia simply adjusted their dance to include him, creating a three-person embrace that swayed to music while wedding guests wiped away tears at the sight of a family that had been built from tragedy, strengthened by adversity, and sustained by the daily choice to prioritize love over every other consideration. "Family," Min Jun announced to the wedding guests, his vocabulary having expanded to include the word that best described what they had become. "Family," the guests echoed back, understanding that they were witnessing something rare and beautiful: the triumph of chosen love over inherited obligation, the victory of courage over cultural pressure, the proof that some things are worth fighting for even when victory seems impossible. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the wedding decorations had been cleared away, the new family of three sat in their living room sharing the quiet contentment that comes after important celebrations. Min Jun had fallen asleep in Nia's arms, exhausted by the excitement of a day spent being celebrated by dozens of adults who had watched him survive crisis, illness, and the complicated process of being raised by people from different worlds who had learned to create a new world together. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Nia asked quietly, looking down at the child who had brought them together and who would carry forward the legacy of their unconventional love story. "I think," Jaehyun replied, settling beside them on the sofa, "that we did the brave thing, and sometimes the brave thing and the right thing are the same choice." Madame Lee appeared in the doorway, having stayed to help with cleanup and to spend a few more minutes with the grandson who had taught her that families could grow larger rather than smaller if people were willing to let love overcome fear. "He looks peaceful," she observed, studying Min Jun's sleeping face. "He looks safe," Nia corrected. "He looks like a child who knows he's loved unconditionally by people who will never make him choose between the different parts of himself. That is the greatest gift we can give him," Madame Lee agreed. "The knowledge that he belongs completely, exactly as he is." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching Min Jun sleep in the security of a home built from love rather than inherited from obligation, all three adults understood that their story was both ending and beginning. The crisis that had brought them together was resolved. The battles over custody, culture, and competing loyalties had been fought and won through compromise rather than conquest. The media attention had faded, the legal challenges had been resolved, and the professional consequences had been survived. But the real story, the daily choice to build a family based on love rather than convenience, the ongoing challenge of raising a child across cultural boundaries, the lifetime commitment to choosing courage over safety, was just beginning. And as Seattle's autumn rain began its gentle percussion against windows that framed their multicultural haven, 3 people who had learned to love beyond the boundaries of tradition, expectation, and fear settled into the most beautiful kind of ordinary happiness. The kind that starts with crisis and grows into contentment through the patient accumulation of small choices to prioritize what matters most over what appears most practical. The kind that proves love is not just an emotion, but a daily decision to build something beautiful with another person, even when the rest of the world thinks you're making the wrong choice. The kind that transforms strangers into family, tragedy into triumph, and impossibility into the most natural thing in the world. 2 years later, the pediatric wing of Seattle Children's Hospital bustled with its usual combination of controlled urgency and gentle compassion as Naya made her morning rounds. Now serving as the head of intercultural patient advocacy, she had helped develop programs that supported families navigating healthcare across language and cultural barriers, work that had grown directly from her own experiences bridging Korean and American approaches to childcare and family dynamics. Mrs. Lee, she greeted a Korean mother whose premature twins were in the NICU, automatically switching to the respectful Korean honorifics that Madam Lee had patiently taught her over countless family dinners. The doctors say Minsu's breathing has improved significantly overnight. The woman's relief was visible as Nia translated the medical updates into Korean and then helped her understand the discharge planning process that would allow her family to take their babies home. These conversations, once impossible for Nia, had become second nature as she learned to navigate the intersection of medical expertise and cultural sensitivity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jae-hyun. Minjun's parent-teacher conference is at 3 p.m. Can you make it? She smiled, remembering when such routine family coordination would have seemed impossible. Now, at nearly 3 years old, Minjun attended a multilingual preschool where he learned in English, Korean, and Spanish, a choice that reflected their commitment to raising him with awareness of the diverse world he would inherit, rather than limiting him to any single cultural identity. After her shift, Nia drove to the preschool where Jae-hyun was already waiting in the parking lot, reviewing notes on his tablet. His consulting firm, specializing in helping American companies navigate Korean business culture, had grown beyond their wildest expectations as more corporations recognized the value of authentic intercultural expertise rather than superficial cultural awareness training. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing her cheek as they walked toward the school entrance together. "Good. Challenging, but good. I helped 3 families today understand treatment plans, and we're launching the new Cultural Liaison program next month." She squeezed his hand. "How was yours?" "Productive. I just signed a contract with Microsoft to help them expand their Seoul operations. Apparently, having a Korean CEO who actually understands American business practices is more valuable than anyone expected." They found Minjun in his classroom, engaged in animated conversation with his teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, about the family tree project that was hanging on the wall behind them. The artwork showed a complex diagram with photographs of Nia, Jae-hyun, Madam Lee, Dolores, and Marcus, who Minjun had begun calling Uncle Marcus after he became a regular fixture at family gatherings. "Minjun has been telling us about your family traditions," Ms. Rodriguez said, as they settled around the small table designed for parent conferences. "He's particularly excited about the Korean New Year celebration you're planning. Halmione is teaching me special songs," Minjun announced proudly, using the Korean word for grandmother that had become as natural to him as any English vocabulary. "And Grandma Dolores is making her special cookies for all the guests." The teacher's notes reflected what they had observed at home. A confident, curious child who switched effortlessly between languages and cultural references, who saw diversity as normal rather than challenging, and who had internalized the lesson that families could be built from love rather than inherited from convention. "There is one thing I wanted to discuss," Ms. Rodriguez continued. "Min-jun has been asking questions about his birth parents. He understands that Uncle Jae-hyun is his father's brother, and that his parents died in an accident. But he's starting to wonder about what they were like, what they would have wanted for him." Nia and Jae-hyun exchanged glances, having anticipated this conversation as Min-jun grew older and more capable of understanding his origin story. "We've been preparing for this," Jae-hyun said. "We have photographs, videos, letters that Soo-jin wrote to Min-jun before he was born. We want him to know his parents were good people who loved him, and that choosing to honor their memory doesn't diminish the family we've built together." "That's a healthy approach," the teacher agreed. "Children need to understand their history to feel secure about their future." After the conference, they took Min-jun to the park where he had learned to walk, watching him navigate playground equipment with the fearless confidence of a child who had never doubted that the adults in his world would catch him if he fell. "Appa," he called to Jae-hyun, using the Korean word for father that had evolved naturally from their daily routines. "Push me on the swing." "Yama, come too," he added, waving to Nia with the inclusive gesture that characterized all his interactions with the adults he loved. As they settled into the comfortable rhythm of family time, Jae-hyun pushing the swing while Nia captured photographs that would be added to the ever-growing collection documenting Min-jun's childhood, she reflected on how different this reality was from anything she could have imagined during those first desperate days in the hospital emergency room. "Do you think we're doing everything right?" she asked Jae-hyun, as Min-jun moved to the climbing structure, his attention captured by a group of children who were playing some elaborate game involving pirates and treasure. "I think we're doing everything with love," he replied. "And I think that's what matters most." That evening, after Min-jun had fallen asleep to the bilingual bedtime story that had become their nightly tradition, Nia and Jae-hyun sat on their back porch, watching the Seattle skyline twinkle in the distance. "Marcus called today," Nia said quietly. "He wanted to let us know that he and Dr. Patterson from Pediatrics are officially engaged." Jae-hyun smiled. "I'm happy for him. He deserves someone who appreciates what an extraordinary person he is. He said something interesting when I congratulated him. He said watching us fight for our relationship taught him that settling for safety isn't the same as finding happiness." "Smart man. Very smart man," she agreed. "I'm grateful every day that he loved me enough to push me toward you, instead of trying to keep me safe from you." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood, children playing, neighbors greeting each other, the distant hum of traffic that marked the rhythm of a city where millions of people from dozens of cultures created daily miracles of coexistence and mutual support. "Nia," Jae-hyun said eventually, "I want to tell you something I've never said before." "Okay. Thank you for saving us. Not just Min-jun, but all of us. You saved me from a life of obligation without joy. You saved my mother from missing out on the best parts of being a grandmother. And you saved Min-jun from growing up thinking he had to choose between different parts of himself." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of someone who had become home in every sense of the word. "You saved me too," she replied. "You saved me from believing that wanting love was selfish, that asking for happiness was too much, that settling for safety was the same as finding fulfillment." As if summoned by their conversation, Min-jun appeared in the doorway wearing his favorite pajamas, the ones with both English and Korean characters that Madame Lee had brought from Seoul. "I had a dream about my first parents," he announced with the matter-of-fact tone that children use for sharing profound insights. "They were happy that I have so many people who love me now." Nia's throat tightened with emotion as she lifted him into her lap. "What did they say in your dream?" "They said thank you for taking care of me, and that families can get bigger when people choose to love each other." Jae-hyun reached over to stroke Min-jun's hair. "That's exactly right, little one. Families grow when people choose love over fear. Like how Uncle Marcus chose to love Dr. Patterson even though they work together?" Min-jun asked with the logical connections that constantly surprised the adults in his world. "Exactly like that," Nia confirmed. marveling at how this child who had survived tragedy, illness, and the complicated process of being raised across cultural boundaries had somehow internalized the most important lessons about love, resilience, and the courage required to build authentic relationships. As they settled Minjun back into bed, he looked up at them with the trusting expression of a child who had never doubted that he was wanted, valued, and protected by people who would choose him every day, regardless of what challenges arose. "I love our family," he said sleepily. "All the different kinds of love in our family." "We love our family too," Nia whispered, understanding that he had articulated something profound about the nature of chosen relationships, intercultural connection, and the possibility of building something beautiful from the fragments of loss. Later that night, as Seattle rain began its gentle rhythm against windows that framed their multicultural haven, Nia and Jae-hyun held each other in the quiet contentment of people who had learned that love was not a feeling, but a daily choice. The choice to show up, to compromise, to grow, and to believe that what they were building together was stronger than any pressure the world could bring to bear against it. In the distance, the Space Needle stood illuminated against the darkness like a beacon of possibility, reminding them that some cities, like some families, grew beautiful precisely because they embraced diversity rather than fearing it. And in the nursery down the hall, Minjun slept peacefully, dreaming the dreams of a child who would grow up believing that love conquered fear, that families could span continents and cultures, and that the most important legacy anyone could leave was the courage to choose authenticity over approval, connection over convenience, and hope over the safer but smaller option of protecting oneself from the beautiful risks inherent in loving other people completely. Theater Epilogue. The Echo of Love. 5 years after that first desperate night in the hospital emergency room, the question, "I can't do this," had been replaced by, "We can do anything together." Minjun, now 8 years old, stood at the front of his elementary school's multicultural celebration, confidently presenting his family's story to classmates whose own backgrounds reflected the beautiful complexity of modern American families. Behind him sat Nia, Jae-hyun, Madame Lee, Dolores, Marcus, and Dr. Patterson, a chosen family that proved love could transcend every boundary that society constructed to separate people from each other. "My family," Minjun announced to his audience, "is made of people who chose each other because they wanted to build something beautiful together. And that's how I learned that the best families aren't born. They're made from love, patience, and the courage to keep trying even when things get difficult." As applause filled the auditorium, Nia felt tears of gratitude for the journey that had brought them from crisis to contentment, from strangers to family, from fear to the most extraordinary kind of ordinary happiness. The little boy who had once cried inconsolably in a hospital room was now confident, bilingual, and secure in the knowledge that he belonged completely to a family that had been built specifically to nurture all the different parts of his identity. And the adults who had learned to love him had discovered that sometimes the most important question isn't, "Can I do this?" but "Can we do this together?" The answer, written in the daily routines of breakfast conversations in 2 languages, bedtime stories that honored multiple cultures, and family celebrations that created new traditions from the best of old ones, was always yes. Love, they had learned, was not just strong enough to conquer fear. It was creative enough to build something entirely new from the beautiful collision of different worlds choosing to become one. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born into, but the one that finds you when you need it most. What other impossible families deserve their chance to exist?